Members of the, oh, one, two, three, oh. Good morning. Welcome to meeting 30 of the Planning and Growth Management Committee. Welcome to members of the committee, to other members of council in attendance. Wow, I love the vibration and the reverberation of this microphone. Well, I appreciate that too, Councillor, but I'm not repeating that. To other members of council in attendance and to the members of the public, for those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what is coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Confirmation of the minutes, May 1st, 2018, moved by Councillor Campbell. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. We have an agenda here, a number of communications. Today there are other matters on today that people might have interest in as well. So we are going to try and go through the agenda as efficiently as we can, and we'll see in the afternoon how we're going to be able to deal with the ability to complete all the items or not and try and work it out from there. With that in mind, people that are coming to speak to us today, you do have 5 minutes and we do want to hear from you, but if you are repeating what someone else has said and you can give it to us a little bit shorter, I think most of us would appreciate that in light of the fact that we have to be able to get out of here and give our staff enough time to vote as well today, along with other people that have interest in the campaigns. Going through the agenda, the first item is the official plan review draft built form policies. I have a motion for that if no one has any questions or speakers on it. And the motion is simply that in our policies, we should have a description of height in meters and stories, because there are sometimes confusions when people bring forward buildings and as to what the height of the building should actually be, and has caused confusion. So that is the amendment that I would move. Councillor Bylaw? Staff have drafted it for me.
Sorry?
Oftentimes you end up with mezzanines, you end up with commercial floors. We're simply trying to know what the height of a building will actually be because they vary in height.
I know, that's why it should always be in meters, no?
Pardon me?
It should always be in meters.
But right now it only says it in stories.
Oh, okay. So you're adding the...
I'm adding the word, so the heights will be in meters for the exact purpose you're saying. So when someone knows it's a 50-story building, they also know how many meters. So I am moving the motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, meeting's adjourned. All right, good try. Item number 2, draft official plan amendment for dwelling room protection policies. There are speakers on that. Item number 3, zoning bylaw amendments to implement Eglinton Crosstown LRT and Finch West LRT. We have to hold until 10 o'clock. It's a scheduled public hearing. Midtown in Focus is scheduled for 10:30. The Unilever precinct planning study is scheduled for 11 o'clock. That was great expectations on behalf of our clerk staff. Don Mills Crossing proposal report. Item 30.6. There is, yes, there's a motion that I had on that. And that was to reach out to the Ontario Science Centre to discuss the future of their lands, which is in the same area. I had been approached a while back by the former chair to see if they could work with us through the process and possibly relocate their facility onto some of the city lands. And I thought, seeing as it's comprehensive plan for the Four Corners, at least we should extend the invitation. And that's what this motion does. So I would move my amendment. All those in favor? Any opposed? The item is amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Item 30.7, 844 Don Mills Road, 1150 and 1155 Eglinton Avenue East, official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and plan of subdivision applications, request for direction report. We have the report in front of us.
I have a number of motions that are still coming.
We have a few motions that the clerks is just putting onto their screen. I will hold that down for the moment while they're ready. I know the local councillor had some minor changes, but, and I believe the applicant has said to us by way of letter, they were satisfied with it, and we don't have any speakers. So I might come back to this shortly as soon as the clerk has the motions ready, so we can deal with that item and have one less on our agenda. I'll hold that myself for the moment. Are any members of committee, by the way, have any concerns about it? If I just bring it back after with the motions that the local councillor had in there? With the report, is it? Thank you. I'm doing a forward check. Now I'm going through all the pages of the recommendations. Item PG 30.8, proposed options to increase as-of-right zoning permission for municipal shelters. Councillor DeChano wishes to hold that. Toronto Green Standards, version 3, review of potential incentives. We have some speakers on that. PG 30.10, Toronto Local Appeal Body Chair's Annual Report.
There's a speaker, 2 speakers.
There was 2 speakers on that, members of committee, and I understand that the chair is here, but can only be here in the morning. So I'm thinking, if with your permission, I'd move that we deal with that as the first item now we deal with. Have the speakers, have the chair here. And to any members of council that are within earshot as well, please, the chair is here. If you have questions of him, as we go forward now, it's your opportunity to ask those, and we can deal with those items. So the first thing is the speakers, and so motion to deal with that item 10 now. All those in favor? Any opposed? Speakers. Mr. Kettle, you're here? Where is Jeff? I don't see Mr. Kettle here. The other item, the other speaker is Al Kivi. Is Mr. Kivi here? So I don't see any of the speakers here. What I'll do is I will go to any questions that I'd like to bring the chair forward, if I could, wherever he is. Is the chair here? And if the speakers are here before we deal with the item, with your permission, members, I'll bring them up at that time. Good morning. If you could, for all of our knowledge and those that might be watching in YouTube land, tell us who you are, and we'd love to hear from you.
My name is Ward. Chair of the Toronto Local Appeal Body.
Sino, and I'm with Court Services.
And Russ Brunel, I'm also with Court Services.
Mics are on, but mine's loud. So you can just maybe pull it a little bit closer. Don't be afraid. My colleagues are so nice.
We'll try and speak up.
Depending on your decision.
Sir. Should I speak, sir, to the report? If I,
Yes, please do.
Just very brief introduction.
We would love to hear from you. We were very supportive of having the T-Lab go in place, and you are our representatives there trying to deal with the issues that you have on these items. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and if there's any other suggestions from yourselves, that as well.
All right, thank you, sir. As you know, T-Lab was established May 3rd of last year, and we began hearing matters in August of 2017. This report that you have before you deals with the calendar year of 2017, but since then we've had 5 additional months of hearings. We've held somewhere between 100 and 200 appeal hearings and motion hearings in respect of matters from the 4 panels of committees of adjustment of the city. We have new premises, and we have therefore overcome some of the heating, air conditioning, HVAC issues that were experienced before. You may hear comments about those. The tribunal has 7 members. We are functioning, I think, very well and cooperatively. They are essentially volunteer members, but they are disciplined in the issues of variance and consent appeals, and they are senior members appointed through your council as a reflection of their interest in serving the city. The annual report is, as I say, a short window of statistics. We have set several parameters and objectives for service in the City of Toronto. One is that appeal hearings be dealt with in approximately 100 days, roughly 1/3 of the time occupied in the past by the appeal process outside of Toronto. We're almost meeting that schedule. In fact, we're moving closer to it than the annual report shows. We have set a series of rigorous rules for disclosure. Those rules have been met with some resistance at the outset, but there's a growing acceptance that they disclose the changes made by applicants and the positions of the parties, and we have a growing indication that settlement is becoming a greater interest to the parties because of that disclosure. We're also undergoing a very significant review process of the rules and making adjustments to those rules to permit timelines for city legal and others to get instructions, and that process will unfold over the midpoint of this year. We've completed public hearing sessions on them. We're an unusual body, as you may recall, because we have two heads. We sit as hearing officers on appeals in formal settings set by the regulations under the Statutory Powers Procedures Act, but we also hold public meetings whereby we act as a kind of council panel, and that is the only time we get together to discuss public issues in public. So I would conclude by the report by commending it to you. It has a series of recommendations at the end. We have an interest in improving the circumstance, so there are approximately 5 recommendations, and I understand court services will later comment on some of those to the extent that they involve the city other than actions that can be taken under our current mandate. And I can say at the outset that I believe the general reception by the public is positive to the work of the Toronto Local Appeal Body. They are a set of members that are conscientious. Our decisions are thorough and respond to the issues that are put before us. And while there may be some disagreement with any decision that resolves conflict between citizens, we think they're generally been accepted. We've had deputations from Mr. Cattell, both, you have them on your list, both from FONTRA and Leaside Property Owners Association, and Mr. Kivy on behalf of the South Eglinton Ratepayers Association. We're well aware of the very strong participation of those interest groups, both in our public meetings and in their appearances before the tribunal on site-specific hearings, and they're very good contributors to the process. The only other thing I would conclude with, sir, is to say that not only has there been an uptake recently in settlements because of the disclosure rules, we have had a few mediation sessions, and we have encouraged mediation by placing in our rules an unusual but interesting provision that a member who senses a mediation is advantageous as between the parties, we can compel the parties to meet for mediation. It would be non-binding mediation, but it does represent a power that's different than ever exercised in the past by tribunals, and it's there and it's ready to go. So we look at the member that has the file is assigned the file 100 days in advance of the actual hearing, tracks the filings that are required pursuant to the disclosure rules, and can make an adjudication whether that's a particular candidate for mediation. And we think that that is a benefit that can serve the public by indicating early whether or not the parties should be asked to get together for mediation. We have not instituted a formal pilot project for mediation, but we have instituted this review, and we have very specific provisions in our rules as to how to conduct mediations. And as I say, a small number have occurred. More settle in advance rather than require even mediation or a hearing. That's my comments for the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. Do either of the parties with you wish to make comments, or you're here to answer
We're here to
questions?
answer any questions.
Okay, so I will ask you one because you brought it up, and we are a little different because we're going to have deputations after you from the same two individuals. So you've heard them speak to you about concerns. Could you give us an idea of what their concerns were they expressed and whether you are or aren't able to deal with those issues? Because we're going to hear from them after, and I'll ask you the question now.
We have extensive written correspondence from Mr. Cattell and Mr. Keevy on our rules review process, and we have had public deputations from both of them. Their concerns are both positive and directed at improving the process, so they have made specific recommendations on the processing of appeals and the timelines involved. And those matters are all being considered by the panel and will be responded to, perhaps with a draft set of revisions late July, but certainly over the summer. So their specific concerns are quite detailed, but they're not heavy in the sense that they cannot be addressed or explained. And I think that I'd be a bit presumptuous to try and prioritize any concerns they've had. They have had a full airing and a very respectful hearing of their concerns, and we're putting those in the hopper for considerations with others as to how to address, if it's appropriate to address them.
Thank you. And the other question I had was on mediation. So you said you've only had a few mediations so far, but you are looking to require mediations if you see that it will be helpful. So I think our staff in the city and my colleagues know I'm often one that pushes to get people to talk to each other to find a way to resolve issues because they may not be as far apart as they think, and it really speeds up the process. Can you tell me where you think you're going on that and if you'll be able to get more mediation in effect? And with that involved, there is the issue that we brought up about having to have, I think it's 90 days in advance, written submissions, which is a little difficult for some people. If you're just a neighbor or a resident in the area.
Right. Our current rules require that anyone who wishes on an appeal, whether a party or a participant, to make their concerns known must file a statement of their position and disclose that midway through the process from the notice of appointment to the actual hearing date. So the public is becoming quite acclimatized to having to put in writing their concerns. It's a form online, it's easily fillable, and it's an all electronic process, so it took a little bit of a learning curve. There still is a concern about having to apply signatures, and we're going to deal with that, but that's a learning curve. So on the suggestions that have been made with respect to mediation, we are entertaining an express declaration as to whether a party on the filing forms believes mediation would be relevant, should be pursued. And that's not on the forms at the moment, but has been requested to be put on the forms, and it's a good idea. The TLAB process is so far voluntary. There's no requirement that anyone petition to be a party or a participant. They simply elect what status they would like. Once they've elected a status of either a party or participant, they are required to fill out a statement to reveal their position. And it would be a simple matter to include in that they indicate whether or not mediation is also something they would like to pursue voluntarily. the change from voluntary mediation to mandatory mediation is a decision the rules still leave with the individual members. Having assessed the parties, their statements as to what their issues are, we then leave it to the member to decide whether it's worthwhile to compel them to get together early. We haven't discussed altering that for the moment.
At the tribunal hearing, if two parties are in front of you on the day of it, is it something that the member might also consider there? As I've been to other tribunals and watched them happen where the member has looked at the parties and basically said, you might really want together to figure this out because you really don't want to leave it to me. I'm in an orderly mood today and you don't know where I'm going to be. And it was amazing how the parties left the room and worked something out.
And that's occurring daily. Yesterday I had a hearing. We had a very contentious one-day hearing, and we only finished one witness. We had an adjournment for a period of time. They assembled yesterday, and they brought a settlement in. We resolved it. We had 2 extra days set aside for it, but they had seen the side of the parties' cases. They had met, they resolved it, and they're doing that more frequently.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions of, members of committee that wanted to ask of Mr. Lord? Not seeing any. No, not non-members of committee first. And I don't know if Councillor Matlow had any questions of Mr. Lord. Okay, then I just wanted to be sure I know how busy you are on your own items today. And then members of committee, Councillor Perks, you had questions, and then Councillor Campbell.
First of all, thank you very much for both coming today and also the work you've done in establishing this body, and it's very helpful. I'm just looking at your performance metrics, and I note that 2 of the metrics that seem to be a bit of a struggle are the appeal received to notice of hearing days. So you get the appeal and then the notice going out. I assume it says that you've not been meeting that in the majority of cases, and I'm wondering what the issue has been there.
All right, the 4 panels of the committees send appeals to TLAB. They so far have been different in their approaches. They have sometimes sent them when the appeal is lodged at the end of the appeal period, but some committee panels group them into maybe 20 appeals at a time and then send them electronically to TLAB. That creates a potential delay. Our goal, staff goal, is receive the appeal, and our notice of hearing goes out in a 5-day period. Very quick turnaround. That becomes more difficult with lumpy groups of appeal. There can be delays in that if there's an imperfection in the appeal, the appeal fee hasn't been filed, or there's an incomplete form. That we have a process of administrative review and adjudicative review that can delay that 5-day period. But in the main, I'm told by staff that we're hitting in the 5 to 8 day period on the main for matters that don't have to be looked at in a second way. So that's a level of service, and we're all conscious of it, and staff are very active to try and make sure it works. And I think we're discussing with Mr. Mizzi ways and means to eliminate the lumpiness.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And the other one that seems to have some room for improvement is the hearing to decision days?
Decision days?
The hearing to decision, yeah.
Yes. I have asked the members on a voluntary basis to provide me with a draft of their decision within 12 days of the actual hearing so that it can be reviewed, not for content, but for presentation and technical view, and issued in 14 days, 2 weeks, which is it's a robust target because people have things intervening, and some of these hearings are quite complex. One thinks a committee of adjustment hearing appeal can be conducted in half a day. Many are taking full days, and many more. A number also go to 2 and 3 and 4 days because they have consents and lots of players interested. That doesn't affect the issuance of that statistic, because that statistic is once the hearing door is closed, we want the decision out the door in 14 days. But if the decision is complicated, lengthy, and complex, and is marred with other decisions at the same time, that can slip a bit. But basically, the members are really quite well responding, and we have a follow-up process whereby if there's a lengthy outstanding set of decisions, we have an internal discipline process.
Okay, I don't need to know about that. Thank you. That's quite helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just trying to understand, the City of Toronto, I guess, brought forward 11% of the appeals. Is that correct? That's on page 18?
I wouldn't dispute the statistics. These are compiled by staff, yes?
Okay, so 11% of the items were before you were brought by the city, 66% by the applicant. So I'm trying to understand in terms of the outcome. It says 10% approved, but I don't know if that's from the applicant that were approved, or if that's from the City of Toronto contesting a C of A decision were approved.
Yes, that's a difficult thing to get one's mind around, because Mr. Keevy, Mr. Cattell will have perhaps for you advice that the pattern of decision-making at TLAB is reflective of the pattern of decision-making previously at the Ontario Municipal Board in terms of development approvals. And the reason it's difficult is depends where you pick your measurement. The disposition by TLAB can be a disposition on an appeal from an applicant, on an appeal from an appellant neighbor, on an appeal from the City of Toronto, or a combination of appeals. But the decision is a decision that deals with the variances, not who brought them before us.
So does 10% approved, that means in 10% of the cases, the variances were approved?
The appeals were approved, I think, is the statistic.
But the appeals are coming 66% from the applicant and 10% from the city, and they would be contrary positions. So anyway, my suggestion would be to, if the next time there's reporting, if a little bit more
Clear.
a little clearer, maybe a little broader, a little more detail.
And that,
And then you've got 5% were refused and 16% were dismissed. So I'm not sure what the difference is between refused and dismissed.
well, again, the decision will have categories. Some of variances may be approved, some may be refused. Some conditions, if it's an appeal of a condition that a panel imposed, it can be refused or approved or dismissed. It depends on how it's phrased. And this statistic, I think, is one that you quite properly point out needs definitions.
Okay, good.
And approach.
I can appreciate this is the first time you're going through this. Now, the other question I have is, have you had a case before you yet where a settlement was not possible? In other words, where the builder had already built and exceeded the variances that were permitted by the Committee of Adjustment, and then the Committee of Adjustment approved those variances. So the builder has gone beyond variances approved. Committee of Adjustment said, okay, we get it, and then it's come to you. And in that case, there's no settlement possible. Because they've already done it. They either have to change what they've done, or you agree to what they've done. Have you had a case like that?
You've had a number of cases where variances are to recognize and maintain construction that has occurred.
That's what I mean.
Occurred illegally, yes.
Right.
We have those, and we approach them as though that construction hasn't existed.
Okay.
As though they're applications, bona fide applications on their merits, and they are reviewed on policy and the four tests under the Act, and the member makes the decision based on the evidence. Okay. With the knowledge of what the committee did and with the knowledge that construction has occurred, but with the admonition and direction that they're to be considered as originating variances without construction.
I see. Okay, thanks for the answers.
Thank you. Are there any other members that have questions? Not seeing any. Mr. Lord, just, you had said before there were some issues with the facilities. Instead of asking what they were, are they good now?
They're almost perfect now. There are still some renovations ongoing, and Ms. Garasino is on top of that work, and they're quite impressive facilities that certainly invite attendance. And they're a credit to the city because they are new, and they are, the HVAC is working.
And then, in some ways, your work is a review of the work of our Committee of Adjustment. And I think the questions of my colleague, Councillor Campbell, as to how many of the ones that City Council wanted to refer to you and others are an important way for us to measure what's happening. And I also like to get that same information as to what's happening at the committee from our staff. So in your next reporting, if there are ways that you can help us understand better what's coming in the way of the appeals, the nature of what they might be to some extent, and where the city staff was and or the political side working with, then we can help and use that information to analyze with our own staff and see where we could possibly train our staff and our members, and where it's just simply a matter of a difference of opinion. And I'll also say that in some areas, because in the community I represent, now we end up getting a standard application where someone has a side yard variance and a coverage variance because it's been customary. And on some of those, I go back and say, just because it's customary doesn't mean it's right. We have small lots that would have variances, and then you have very large lots, and they go for the same variances to put the maximum house on the property, and that then creates a style of housing that might not be right, but it was permitted. So in some cases, we'll be looking towards TLAB in those where 2 houses on the street might have had it. But I've said to our staff, I don't care. Tell the committee to challenge the individual and ask them why that is appropriate for that site. Not just because you sat on a roof and looked in 4 directions and saw a height there, a side yard there, a coverage here, and something else, and said, I'll do that, and make the application. Because our residents, and I think Councillor Fillion's that way, our residents say there's a zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw has all this information in it, how you're supposed to build. Why are you allowing more than that when that's the zoning bylaw? And what is the test that you've put those people to make sure that it really is appropriate?
It is a conundrum before the tribunal as well. The city's official plan speaks to character measures in somewhat broad terms, but we have specific applications that neighbors are addressing and builders are addressing. And we welcome direction, policy direction on matters such as that, including precedent. The city has adopted an official plan amendment, OPA 320, which helps to focus the area of comparison. Instead of a broad study area, it brings the study area of comparison of impact down to a narrower location. That amendment is before the Ontario Municipal Board, has been there a long time, and we have the difficulty of applying the existing official plan and being argued that the proposed official plan amendment 320 should be given weight, and we deal with that every day, but we have the legal barrier of applying the existing official plan, and the inchoate or the pending official plan is have a difficult status. So I certainly take your direction. We will include what we can in an annual report, but I would also urge that the city push that OPA amendment 320 on for clarity. Get that appeal resolved at the board, and maybe some of the innuendo and weight associated with precedent and what's occurred before can be put into a proper perspective.
Thank you. So Councillor Filling, you had questions?
Yes, sorry, just going back to the treatment of applications where it's already built and then coming in subsequently for the variances, and your statement that they are to be treated as if it was a new variance and the building had not been constructed. Has there been any analysis to see if that is, in fact, how they're being treated? And I'll preface that by saying I understand that each case is different, but for example, and maybe you haven't had enough of these cases, but to pick below-grade garage as an example where the remedy would be to literally tear down the building, and a comparison of how many below-grade garages get approved when the building isn't constructed versus how many get approved after the fact, after it's been constructed, because of the severity of the remedy, shall we say.
We have had perhaps 4. I read all of the decisions, and I'm also the reader for the Thomson Reuters Reporter Service, so I am looking for precedent decisions. And the category of decisions about that deal with as-built or illegally built construction recognition, I'm alert to. There are about, I think there have been 4 of those in the roughly 10, 12 months of hearings. I know that the members accept the administrative law principle that they are to review those requests fresh, as if the construction had not occurred. There's always the reality that construction is out there, but they look at the variances and take the evidence in to weigh it on the basis that it's a fresh new variance. I'm quite comfortable that the members respect that administrative law principle and apply it.
And I guess, 4, for example, wouldn't be a large enough sample, but I'm not aware, and I know the T-Lab's only a year old, but I'm not aware of either with the municipal board or the T-Lab ever making a decision which results in a house being torn down, to pick an extreme example, or half torn down, that would be the only remedy. So I just...
T-Lab has not had that circumstance. The Ontario Municipal Board has required accessory structure heights to be not approved, not recognized, and it's then for buildings to require that roof line be brought into compliance. We have not had a circumstance where that, and we have not had a recognition and maintain variance for integral garages that I'm aware of, or below grade integral garages. We certainly had variances that have addressed integral garages in areas where they are not permitted, and the city is very strong on its regulation and policy related to below grade integral garages. They get specific attention in terms of site requirements and buildings and inspections and transportation. All comment on those types of applications with specificity. So we are alert to that, shall I call it a predisposition not to approve below grade integral garages unless exceptional consistent conditions agreeable to transportation and the member are in place to protect the building from flooding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. I don't see any other questions of yourself. What I'm going to do then is have the 2 deputants come forward, and then we'll complete the item after that. Thank you very much for coming, and then we'll have some speakers after that as well.
Thank you.
So on my speaking list, I have Mr. Kettle, And then I have Mr. Keefe. Are you speaking together, separately?
We're both here. We both worked on the submission.
I'm riding shotgun today.
I don't think Mr. Kettle needs a shotgun, but I'm sure he's happy to have one. Mr. Kettle, will you have your 5 minutes? As succinct as you can be, but we do want to hear from you, and you've had the opportunity also to hear from Mr. Lord.
Yeah, so my name is Jeff Cattell. I'm co-chair of the Federation of North Toronto Resident Associations, and Al Keevy is chair of the Neighborhoods Working Group with Sarah, the South Eglinton Resident Ratepayer Association. So the forwarding of this annual report, and indeed the presence here today of Mr. Lord, I think is a remarkable occasion. If a year ago the chair of the OMB would not have been here at Toronto Planning and Growth Management Committee, so that is actually a significant event to have that degree of relationship and friendship and cordiality between the appeal body and City Council. So that's certainly a benefit. And the opportunity of that presentation provides an opportunity for us as residents to comment on the progress to date. And we commend the TLAB. They've recently conducted 2 open meetings intended to receive feedback from the public regarding their rules, which they established. They put them out as a product, and they've been living with those rules. And after this period of time, 10 months, I guess, they're looking for feedback. And those submissions from the public are posted on the TLAB website. So everything is very open, we find, with the TLAB. So what I'd like to do this morning simply is quickly go through some. As chair of co-president of the Lease side, I was there for the first meeting, more with the concerns. And Al was there from Sarah for the concerns. And then at the second meeting, we basically came back with some, moving beyond the concerns. What do we do about it? As you know, TLAB is an independent quasi-judicial tribunal. And as such, the processes it uses must be fair, accessible, affordable, and understandable. Of greatest importance to the public is whether the decision outcomes are fair. Has natural justice been served? The analyses of decision outcomes to date, as prepared by the Ontario Bar Association and the South Eglinton Ratepayer Association, SARA, show that the outcomes clearly favor the proponent. Sarah's submission identified significant inconsistencies that exist between Committee of Adjustment decisions and TLAB decisions. A majority of cases under appeal to TLAB have been refused at C of A, but subsequently turned around approved at TLAB. The TLAB's decisions on appeal are not consistent with the decisions of the C of A. That would appear surprising to us, that the C of A decision to refuse is generally not upheld by the TLAB. So it would appear, that the outcomes are unbalanced at present. And we're going to suggest some changes to restore balance in the overall process. A significant aspect of this, as we all know, is the imbalance of resources between the proponent and the public. And so one of the things we would propose is that because often there's no lawyer, there's no planner there, or maybe there's a planner but no lawyer, that there be active adjudication by the member. There's a clear need to reduce the disadvantages of underrepresented parties. The proponent will almost always win when the opponents are self-represented or without expert support. To address this, we recommend that TLAB should work to ensure that all applications are examined by the member and cross-examined by the opponents. Active adjudication techniques should be used to ensure that these examinations take place. Secondly, we've come up with a concept of a local knowledge expert. Several recent cases have demonstrated the role of local knowledge experts in the hearing process. We believe that these people can provide opinion evidence along with factual evidence. Right now, it's only factual evidence that people are able to provide, and the opinion expert is left to the so-called experts. TLAB adjudicators, we believe, should weigh the evidence of local knowledge experts. as they do that of other experts. Somebody coming in from Richmond Hill is there on site for a couple of hours. What do they really know about the neighborhood compared with residents that may have, attended committee, have attended, be part of resident associations, take a real interest and passion in their neighborhood. Thirdly, city support for residents in planning appeals. As you know, the Ontario government in its OMB reforms has established a Planning Appeals Support Centre, separate from the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, or LPAT. Such a planning support centre with a similar function could be established for TLAB appeals. It would probably be in the office of the Committee of Adjustment, Michael Mitz's office in City Hall. Fourthly, the concept of an intervener program. There are cases where it would be in the public interest for a not-for-profit organization to be funded to intervene on systemic issues and landmark cases, as with the introduction of a new bylaw or to address hypergrowth in selected communities.
Sorry, Mr. Kettle, you guys are sharing the time?
No.
Then you're
sorry,
finished.
yes. So can I extend a little bit?
You can share my 5 minutes if you...
Because otherwise you'd be finished.
I'll be done in less. Okay.
Okay.
And then Al will share the questions. So we're recommending that City consider the introduction of an intervener program that is specifically targeted to not-for-profit organizations with specific interest in important cases, and that the City provide funding for the intervener program on an annual basis. Similar to the Planning Support Center, the intervener program would need to be established outside of the TLAB. Fifthly, the settlement process. Both the OBA, the Ontario Bar Association, and the City Solicitor are on record as supporting changes to improve the efficiency of the settlement process. However, we are concerned with procedural fairness and not just efficiency with respect to settlements arrived at during private negotiations. We're recommending that the TLAB ensure that all parties are allowed to be active in settlement negotiations and that all participants have full visibility on settlement agreements. We recommend that settlement agreements with material changes should be subject to mandatory notification to all participants. All participants should be allowed to review the changes in advance of a scheduled hearing.
So, Mr. Kettle, I just want to make sure that you don't speak up in all of Al's time. You're reading your letter, which we have.
Yeah, so though we're both going to take questions. He's not going to speak on the matter.
Okay.
Yeah, we co-authored the letter, so I'll
Okay, that's fine. I'm just being...
And lastly, administrative matters. The TLAB has introduced fully online processes, which at least initially has created a barrier for many residents. However, it is anticipated, we agree with Mr. Lord, that these concerns will ameliorate over time. However, the additional deadlines and the front-end loading, if you like, which again Mr. Lord spoke to, of these deadlines has created challenges for residents. It seems like as soon as the appeal is launched, you have to have everything done, and then you sit around for several months waiting for the hearing date. So, in summary, we are pleased that the TLAB has provided an opportunity for feedback on its rules and procedures, thereby demonstrating accountability and responsiveness. We hope that the TLAB follows through with appropriate changes and that this type of effort continues. We note that several of our recommendations would need to be addressed by the City rather than by TLAB, but hopefully TLAB will bring them forward. And we trust that the City would be responsive to those. Thank you for the opportunity to present our recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Kettle. Are there questions then of the deputant? Councillor Matlow.
Hello, gentlemen. So, if I hear you correctly, the main emphasis of your submission to this committee is that there remains an inequity even in our new, city-driven appeals body, and that residents, if I hear you correctly, you're not speaking about maybe the average resident so much who might want to, do some variances, get some variances to their house, but there are a number of sort of speculative builders / flippers who are well-financed and have good planners and lawyers, and they know what they're doing. And the average resident doesn't know the timelines, doesn't have access to lawyers, all that kind of stuff. So If one of the members of this committee could move a motion today to respond to your concerns, would you want to see that motion request that there be some consideration to some of the ideas that you suggested, and perhaps other ideas to level the playing field between the builders and the average neighbor? Is that a fair analysis? Is that something that you'd like to see them do? Or is there something else that you'd like to see them do?
Josh, I think you're right. What we're faced with very often is for the developers, the $30,000 fee that they have to pay their lawyers and planners to go to the TLAB now is essentially a cost of doing business. And they acknowledge that. It reduces their profit, but not by much. I would submit today that we and Sarah have had some experience with mediation more at the Committee of Adjustment level, but mediation works when you have a willing owner, willing developer wanting to come to the table. There's very few of those in the city. Most of them prefer to simply go to TLAB. A cost of doing business is $30,000. Our recommendation, and I haven't consulted with Jeff on this, is really to direct some of that mediation money to the intervener program, because that really equips residents associations to more strongly defend systematic problems of what we call hypergrowth. It's not just growth, it's really hypergrowth. And an intervener funding program, which is used in other jurisdictions, example, the Ontario Energy Board, would really give us power to in a sense, get the $30,000 advantage in our favor. Of course, we would spend that money wisely. Our recommendation is to ask for an equivalent funding of some $200,000 on an intervener program. I think we would see very dramatic results if we had the availability of that type of funding.
Thank you.
There clearly are, in a neighborhood situation, you clearly have, as you say, Councillor Matlow, you have somebody who wants to, add on to their house.
Yeah.
And generally, there was a reasonable request. And the issue in a neighborhood is the look of the street. The character of the neighborhood is based on the look of the street. Adding on behind, generally is not a problem. The issue is where somebody is coming in, a stranger, as it were, and simply wants to build the biggest flat-roofed, modernist structure possible.
Yeah.
And right now, we simply do not have the tools. Like the TLAB is kind of the top of the, only if somebody has appealed are you going to get a TLAB hearing. This whole, the many layers of the triangle, the, city policies, as Mr. Lord mentioned, the OPA 320, the lack of design guidelines in neighborhoods. Leaside, we've got guidelines, but they were in 2003, and it's claimed that they were never approved by council, so they're meaningless. The Willowdale guidelines, I don't know what's happening with those. We need design guidelines. We need heritage to be identified where appropriate. So there's a lot of stuff in that base of the pyramid. We're really just talking about the top end, the stuff that where things get heated. But there's a lot happening down there, and we don't have the tools in place.
But again, in summary, you would like to see this committee focus some attention on providing tools to level the playing field, so that when there is a speculator, a builder coming in to just kind of make a quick buck, get out, and they're well-financed to be able to argue their case, that local residents have an opportunity to at least have some ability to fairly argue their case and have it heard with representation, with planning support, et cetera, at that hearing, no matter what form it takes. And this committee should consider how best to be able to provide that support. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, the time is up for the questions, and I have to stop you now. I'm sorry, it's an extremely heavy agenda, and we heard that as what their comment was. Yeah. Are there any other members of committee that have questions for the deputant? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming. We now have, are there speakers that are non-members of the committee that wish to speak to the item? Councillor Matlow.
I'll speak briefly to respect the committee's time, because I know we have a heavy agenda today. But I really just wanted to support what both Jeff and Al have said today. I've seen this certainly in my community, and I imagine many of you have in yours. Certainly in Midtown, there is an enormous amount of development pressure within the neighborhoods, infill development pressure. And it's one thing when it's sort of one neighbor and the other neighbors are having a conversation about what kind of variances might be considered. But when it goes to the appeal body, committee as well, but certainly when it goes to the appeal body that we're speaking of today, most residents don't really know where to start. They don't understand the process as well as a professional builder would. They certainly don't have the resources financially to be able to hire the planner that they'll need, the lawyer that they'll need typically. And I really actually want to acknowledge that certainly in our area, and I hope that there are other Al Kiwis in other neighborhoods, but Al sort of became an accidental expert on this, as some people do when they've been subject to those concerns themselves, and they delve into the matter. And now what Al does is he tries to go out and support residents with information, providing them with some sort of support and assistance when they're sort of in the dark, not knowing kind of where to go and what to do. But it's great that Al's doing that, but it shouldn't have to be up to Al to do that. The system should automatically provide that kind of assistance. We're seeing that now with the reforms at the OMB, at the provincial level with the new local planning appeals tribunal, and that should be replicated at ours. We've often said, we don't like what the province is doing, we can do things better. Well, now actually they're kind of in the lead of that kind of reform. We should catch up with our own city appeals body. So I hope that this committee will give it some fair consideration. Again, I'm not prescribing what the answer is, but simply to focus in on how do we level the playing field so that when a well-financed builder comes into a neighborhood, they want to build it quick, sometimes far too cheap, to make a lot of money, and they're trying to push this project through, and they can't afford every resource that they need. How do we make sure that a group of residents, right or wrong, at least have the ability to argue their case in a balanced way? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the committee that wish to speak? Councillor Fillion.
I have a motion which I hadn't had a chance to.
No, we're trying to really move it along today because we have a huge... I think you have to hand it to them and maybe they can read it out. And then we'll see if we can type it quickly while you speak, and I'll let you place it at the end.
Okay, you don't want me to read it out?
Well, let them just type.
You should read it out.
Read it out. Sure. Oh, it's in your writing, okay. Read it out.
That the Director of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment be requested to conduct an analysis of Committee of Adjustment and Toronto local appeal body decisions regarding requests for variances to legalize structures that are already built, with the intent of determining whether they are treated similarly to cases where there has been no illegal construction. So it is following up, I guess, on the statement by Mr. Lord that the intent is that they be treated the same. And I have not done any analysis, but I would be very surprised if an analysis showed that they had been treated the same. So if you took if you had a large enough sample and you took a bundle of variances for whatever that had not been already built, and then you took the same variances that had already been built, I think you would see a much higher inclination to approve the ones that have already been illegally built, in effect rewarding people for illegal construction, because I think there is an extreme reluctance to force a house to be torn down or half torn down. I think you might get refusal where it's okay, they just need to alter the roof or something, but where it's, to pick an extreme example, a below-grade garage where the floor of the garage can't be raised, so you would basically require the house to be knocked down, or other similar things where there would be an extreme remedy. I don't recall any decisions like that ever being made, and I certainly recall a lot of similar decisions that decisions on similar situations that haven't been built where they've been turned down. So I just want to test whether what's supposed to be happening in theory is actually happening in practice. My guess is it isn't. And I did speak with staff who I think it's fair to say Mr. Mitzi would welcome the opportunity to do this analysis.
Well, Mr. Mitzi loves more work all the time.
And it's not that as difficult to do because we do separate the ones that are coming back in a second time and they have to pay an extra fee. So there already is a kind of separate listing of those, which would be helpful.
We're just waiting for you. Are there any other members of committee that wish to speak? Councillor Perks, and then we'll just put your motion up on the screen after. Mr. Kettle and Mr. Kiva, you can go back to your seats. Busy room today. Councillor Perks.
So, first of all, I am absolutely delighted that we even get this report coming to Toronto, to the Planning and Growth Committee. It's a good public accountability and airing of a tribunal process that has to be accountable to the public. So thank you for that. And I think it's indicative of I'm hoping, of a new era of how we handle these. We only have 1 year of experience here, and looking through the report, I don't see anything that sets off an alarm bell. I see some things I want to keep my eye on, but I think it's a good first year, and I think the efforts that the appeal body has made to go out and get constructive criticism indicates that there's going to be some continuous improvement there. I do want to note that while there are some concerns that in some cases, you know, as we heard in the deputations, maybe it's not a completely equal playing field. But remember, if you look at the statistics, the number of appeals that get approved is 10%, and the number of appeals is 300. And as I just discovered, that's out of an original 4,500 minor variance applications in a year. So it's a tiny piece of a piece of a piece where the system isn't dealing with the minor variance before we're getting to a hearing and a decision that isn't the one that the community wanted. And I think that that's interesting and valuable to know. So I don't see anything here that's majorly broken, and I look forward to next year's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other speakers. I do want to speak on this. And first of all, I wanted to express my thanks to Mr. Lord for taking on this challenge. And I say that because we all know the discomfort that the public had and that this council had with the process at the Ontario Municipal Board. I think it was extremely well documented. The result of our very loud protest was the province putting it in our lap to try and say, fine, you think you can do better? Go do it, and we're never taking that back. And you pay for it and you manage it. I think that Mr. Lord has taken on that challenge and understands that, and him and his colleagues there have done a really good job of trying to help us work through this process and understand that, and in particular, the different levels of playing fields or abilities for those that can hire professionals against those that have concerns at the side. So really, I think sincere appreciation for that, but also a continued huge challenge, because together, this council and the appeal board, the appeal body, has to continue to try and look as good and better than we have to work out the disagreements between people in neighborhoods that affect themselves so personally, because these are variances that affect the people closest to the area. And that is a very, very tough task to do. The fact that you're going to more mediation and trying to get people to talk about it has been something that the council and city has been extremely supportive of. And the more you can get people to talk, the better it is. You know our problems because you said we can't get OPA 320 approved. We can't get the rules that we want to have in place approved still by the Ontario Municipal Board, which is impacting the ability for our local appeal body to deal with the vision that the city has when it comes to issues that are challenged in front of you, because there are still 2 rules in place. And that makes it extremely difficult, and it's a portrayal of how bad the old system was and how difficult it was to deal with, because those appeals are outstanding. And I will say publicly that we've had discussions with industry members who have agreed wholeheartedly. Let's just have the hearing and decide what the rules are, because having 2 sets of rules is worse for everybody. The other focus is, as my colleagues are saying, the work that we do at the Committee of Adjustment, because in my opinion, it's not just giving funds to neighborhoods or residents to fight an appeal, because our rules should be in place that clearly say what we want in the first place. And those rules should be one that are clear. Just because the neighbor got it doesn't mean you're going to get it. Why do you have to change the side yards? If you're required a meter and a half, whatever it may be, that's the rules. And you bought the property knowing that. The same with the coverage, the same with the heights. I believe that we have to go ahead at our Committee of Adjustment, and I've said it to Mr. Mitzi, and he's trying to explain it to our members. That's the test. Why do you need something different than what's in the zoning bylaw? Not just because I want to put a larger house, or the neighbor has it, or I think I need it. If the house is giving you problems to build, you can't get a decent house, then you may wish a variance. But prove why you actually need it so it never even gets to the tribunal. And then if it does, we've done our due diligence and our rules to put them in place so people know what a level playing ground is. And I think the work we're doing through Mr. Mitzi and the Committee of Adjustment and our staff and ourselves with changing the zoning bylaws and trying to bring those through, and the work that the appeal body is trying to do, the Toronto Local Appeal Body is there, and I'm very pleased with the work that's gone forward, with the resolution we've had to date, with the fact, as it was said, where the chair has come to speak to us about the matters and hear the concerns, not just from us, but heard it from the public. This is something unprecedented when it comes to trying to deal with planning issues in the province of Ontario and Toronto. The city of Toronto has bitched and complained and led the way in it. And we appreciate everything you're doing, I believe, Mr. Lord, and look forward to continuing to understand those issues and help us make the process better. And with that in mind, I think there is a motion from Councillor Fillion. We should vote on the amendment first that he has.
That's all you need to vote on.
And that's all I need to vote on. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Do I have to do anything else, Madam Clerk? Nope, so we are done with that item, and thank you all again for there, and we will go on from there on the agenda. What I would suggest next, if I could, I'll get you in a moment, Councillor Fletcher. We have item number 3, which is a timed item for 10 o'clock, PG 30.3 zoning bylaw amendments to implement the Eglinton Crosstown LRT and Finch West LRT. We have no deputants. The time has passed. Are there any speakers or members of non-members of committee that wish to speak? Don't see any. Any members of committee that wish to speak? Don't see any. I am going to move the recommendations.
Did Councillor Perruzza submit a motion
He'll have to move it at council. He sent a communication, but he hasn't asked anybody to take carriage of it, and he never spoke to me about it. So we will send it to council, and he'll have to deal with it there.
So this committee will send it to council?
We're going to send the item to council. We're adopting the recommendations of staff. It will go to council, and he can move his amendments at council.
All right, I told him I would take carriage of it. I don't know whether it's even in order, but did he submit something for consideration?
So I have one member that wants to cancel the whole thing from Councillor Mamalede. Can we send it to council, allow him to move his motion there? And
I'm just doing what I said I would do.
So do we have
offer to take carriage of it. If you rule something different, then so be it. I'm just.
So let me ask, is there, please, councillor, you have to let me finish.
I am.
No, you can't stand there for a few moments. I have 3 items to deal with, and then I will with pleasure deal with you. But please let me concentrate on this one first. So put up the motion. So it's to relocate some equipment. So that's the motion you wish to place?
I'm placing it as a courtesy.
So is there staff that can tell if is this an issue or not? Because the councillor hasn't even come to speak to us about it.
Through the chair, I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't respond to that. We can certainly, it's a request. We can work to examine this. I just can't make a commitment that it can be resolved. I don't have any background on it.
The planner on item.
Sorry. So is there a planner that was on the item? Because I'm hearing that he had concerns with it.
Tom, there you are. I don't know if you can speak to this. Sorry.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning,
You are?
Mr. Chair. Yes, I could speak to this item.
And you are?
My name is Tom Schwartfeger. I'm the author of the report that supports this item before the committee today, and I have spoken to Councillor Pruitt about this item, this letter that he submitted to the committee.
Do you have concerns with it?
I do. We have gone through an extensive process to figure out where the different elements of the Finch West LRT should be located. So we are quite advanced in that, and city planning did arrive at an agreement with Metrolinx on where these elements would be located. That was over a year ago. So Metrolinx has proceeded to tender the project, award the project, and enter into contracts based on knowing the locations of the elements of the project. So at this point, it's a little late to be revisiting where some of those elements might be. There is property negotiations that are now well advanced and are expected to close in the next few months that are, again, based on where these elements are to be located as is known today. The motion also requests staff to revisit these locations, but it doesn't actually request to amend any of the zoning bylaw amendments that are before the committee today.
I would add, through the chair, I would just add that these elements were part of the approved EA and have been part of the discussion in the public domain for quite some time. So they're known elements or attributes of the facilities.
So is it a big, I'll get to, is it a big deal to try to do this? Because I understand the power stations have certain requirements for distances, and all your agreements are negotiated. So is this a big deal, a lot more than just talking about a request?
It would be.
City staff planner on the file. He
My name is
introduced.
Tom Schwartfeger. Yes, I am.
Yes, sorry, we had him introduce himself at the beginning. He has no chairs. There's no chairs to sit in. Sorry, Tom.
My apologies. It's my first time being at the committee, so
We'll treat you rough.
chose an
don't worry.
available chair.
We'll get all over you, Tom.
I'm ready.
So the question I had of you, is it a big deal?
At this point, yes, it would be a big deal. There are agreements signed, there are contracts signed, there are approved EAs. To revisit that would mean having to open all of those elements up which would severely impact the project at this point and definitely lead to delays.
Can I get the Deputy City Manager also to comment, and then if you have questions, I'll admit them.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the process then to request a change, particularly when there's a contract already in place and let by Metrolinx, and in this case, that award happened a few weeks ago. We, the city, then would be required to pay for any change order extras that Mosaic, who is the company that Metrolinx is engaged, we would have that financial obligation to cover the cost of the relocation. So there is a financial implication as well as potentially a technical implication. But we don't know what that cost would be, and it could be significant depending on what pricing you get back from the contractor.
And I'm going to ask one other question. So there was a full EA process. Was this relocation brought up through that EA process by the local councillor or by anyone else?
I wasn't actually there for the EA process, so I can't speak to that directly, but the councillor had through the EA process plenty of opportunity to chime in and to offer his suggestions and air his concerns through the EA process. That does absolutely involve a public process and involvement of the local ward councillor.
Thank you. Did you have questions, Councillor Matlow? So, well, we were in committee already. Councillor was simply just placing a motion on my colleague's behalf. So to allow non-members to speak, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Councillor Matlow.
Yeah, no,
I'm just trying to get through this today.
I recognize that, but like Councillor Burnside and Robinson and others who, we represent a community along Eglinton, I can't express my frustration well enough. How often it feels like, the question I would have asked you is, do we work for Metro, and rhetorically, admittedly, but do we work for Metrolinx or do we work for the community of Toronto? Because I've just found time and time again that we keep finding out about a contract that Metrolinx has made with Crosslinks or another contractor, or their requirements or their needs that override the concerns of the community. Now, in this case, it's about the impact on a potential development. But in other cases, it's about the impact on public realm, or the impact on quality of life of residents, or night work, or what have you. And the answer is always, well, we got to do this. We got to do this. I know it's messing up everyone's lives, but we got to do this because we already signed a contract. Rather than the focus being what is in the interest of the City of Toronto and our public realm and our official plan and the community's quality of life, rather than what Metrolinx's needs are. So I say this only because I don't know what Councillor Perruzza is trying to achieve here. I've never spoken with him about this. I don't know about the details of this, but what I do know is that if a councillor is asking a mere request to look into an issue, and then you have already arrived at your conclusion that there might be some problems with it, then you pass the motion, you allow at least for the due diligence to be done. Your response will be probably what you've already said anyway. But allow at least for the councillor to represent his community and ask these questions. And ultimately, if it comes back and that's not feasible or realistic or it'd be problematic, you will tell council that, probably in a one-page letter. But why wouldn't you at least give the courtesy to the local councillor to advocate for his community? And I would ask you just to do that courtesy and that basic thing that I think we need to do, so we're not working for Metrolinx, we're working for Toronto.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion, did you wish to speak on it anymore?
No, I'm not even familiar with the issue. I was just moving it as a courtesy.
Okay, I will speak on it. Staff briefed me on this. They were very clear to say that all of the locations went through a very extensive environmental assessment process with public open houses, opportunities for people to comment completely along the line, that the locations are established to be able to provide the power needs of the line within particular parameters, and relocating anything is not easy. That Councillor Perruzza had multiple opportunities through the process to address this and didn't. And that going forward with a request now is something that I believe he should explain to us at council, not that we should just make a decision to do here without knowing what it is. And if he didn't come here today or even send someone from his office to ask us to look at this, I don't understand the great importance of it, and I believe it's most opportunity for him to deal with it at council. So I will not support this here, and I would suggest that my colleagues make the same decision. And Councillor Perruzza is not without an opportunity to present it to us at council. But the courtesy for us to deal with that here, all of you as members of council and non-members do speak to us about what your needs are. And just dropping a motion that could have a substantial impact on the line and to cost without any explanation, I don't think is something that we should just say yes to automatically, because the councillor hasn't taken the time to even show up or speak to us or send us a letter. There's no letter saying it. Oh, there's now a letter here. But no one called my office. No one called any of us except for Councillor Fillion. So personally, I won't support it. I'll leave it for Councillor Perruzza to have his opportunity at council, because I have no evidence that Metrolinx hasn't consulted with people and hasn't worked, and our staff hasn't worked throughout this process to deal with this problem itself, and I think that's the question that has to be asked. So there is the amendment that Councillor Fillion, as a courtesy, has put forward for Councillor Perruzza. All those in favor? Opposed? That doesn't carry. The item as the staff recommendations as are before us, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. That deals with one more item today. Now, members of committee, I know we have a public hearing, but item number 7, which our colleague Councillor Burnside is here, and I know he's giving us his complete attention and time, is 844 Don Mills Road, 1150 Eglinton and 1155 Eglinton Avenue East. I know that the applicant is here as well. The applicant has sent in a letter saying they're satisfied with everything. There are 2 motions that are to be placed with it. One is on behalf of Councillor Burnside, which he's asked me to place in regards to public art and the Section 37. Can that go up on the screen? The first, the one from Councillor Burnside, because that's the short one. Councillor Burnside, in 30 seconds, do you want to tell us what it is?
I can do it in 20. Essentially, it's there are 2 neighborhood improvement areas just in close proximity to this development. I'm trying to ensure that there's money from Section 37 available to upgrade some of their facilities in the community. And I just want to move an extra $250,000 from public art to parks improvements in those areas. Yeah. Yep, same total. Yep.
Okay. Councillor Ballo also had a motion. Did you have another one you wanted to make? Oh, did I have one I wanted to? I'll do that after. For Councillor Ballo, you had a motion?
Yes. Was it circulated to everybody?
Not yet,
Not
because
yet.
there were some minor changes, but if you wanted to put it up and to say what
It's a long motion. It's basically giving authority to the Director of Affordable Housing to negotiate and secure affordable rentals at different levels of affordability for 393 units on the site, and to take advantage of the open door program and other affordable housing incentives. So that is a 4-page motion that is asking the Director of Affordable
drafted
Housing.
by
Staff.
which staff? There's lots of them.
Well, it was actually a joint effort that helped me draft this motion, with planning involved, Affordable Housing Office, and
the applicant's
created
here in
this
the room.
result.
I saw him somewhere.
So everybody's
Mr.
been
Diamond,
working
shake your head
together.
if you've seen it. Okay.
Everybody's been.
That's item 2.
Everybody's been working together to secure, this is a large site, but what we also want to ensure is that not only do we have the units, but we're trying to deepen the subsidies as well. So that is why we're trying to create different levels. So not only at 80% or 100%, we are trying to create different levels of affordability in the 393 units.
And there was a motion that I had. So this one is asking staff to come back and see if they can quantify what a value would be for Section 37 in this area. Was I going to do this or on the Don Mills Crossing? Wasn't I doing this in the Don Mills Crossing? Yes, I was going to do the Don Mills Crossing, so I'm not doing it on this one. I will have to reopen the other one. So don't look at that, it wasn't there. So with those two motions, are there any speakers, non-committee members that wish to speak? Any committee members that wish to speak? I'll give it a very short review. This is a very large development where the city staff and the applicant have worked for an extensive period of time with the local councillor to achieve both the retention of office use on the site, to build condominiums and stacked townhouses on the site, to provide affordable housing, a substantial Section 37 agreement, large parks facilities, parks amenities, and it's coming here where the applicant is shaking his head in the back of the room saying, I'm in agreement, the local councillor is saying it's great, and staff have. This is what you really want to see on applications where all parties are benefiting and the area is getting redeveloped in an area that's in a site that's appropriate for it, along with the retention of historical sites on it and many other issues that came up during the process. It was a long and extensive process, but I will tell you at the end of it, it's not as if anyone got beat up at all. This is the type of process where people sat down, negotiated, and came away ready to do another deal between all parties and agreements. And I think that's really important to see. So I think that we can vote on this as a package, Madam Clerk. All the two motions, and I'll move the staff recommendations, all of them, which is a little bit extensive in it. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried, and thank you all for your help on it. Then Don Mills Crossing, which we dealt with, I would like to move to reopen it, item number 6. Reconsider it. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. The motion that I had is simply in looking at the other 3 corners and the rest of the site to try to work as we have in other areas and report back if there's a way to put a Section 37 value in place, so if people ask for additional density, they know what they're going to have to pay, and it's not something that is negotiated on every turn. In this particular case, almost all the balance of the land is actually city-owned because it's Creatio that is carriage of the other 3 sites, but they won't have it forever. At one time, they will sell it, and then others will have it and may wish to change the plans no matter what's approved. So I'm moving this motion to try and get a response and some idea as what it might be and a number to go forward. All those in favor, staff have written the motion. Did you have a question, Councillor Perks? No, it's fine. You're more than welcome to. Mr. Linton, are you in support of this motion?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? The previous motion. All those in favor for the Science Center? Opposed? That's carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We've dealt with that item twice. Now I have item number 2. I'm doing number 2. Councillor, please, I know, it's a very big agenda, and we're trying to get items done so staff that are here can, and people that are here can go. Item number 2 was a draft official plan amendment, dwelling room protection policies. We had 3 speakers. That was the next item on the agenda before the timed item. So I'm going to deal with the 3 speakers that are here and deal with the item because the other items are very lengthy. So I have a Jeremy Withers, Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. Is Jeremy here? Jeremy, please come forward. To you and to the other speakers today, we allow 5 minutes as a maximum. Then if there are questions, we will have that. If you can facilitate us by telling us what's really important and less, we really do appreciate that. And the same to the other 2 speakers that are here. I have Emily and then I have Hamish. Please, it's yours, Jeremy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Withers. I'm a PhD student at the University of Toronto and a longtime member of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak in support of this draft official plan amendment, and I want to thank the Growth and Planning Committee and Councillor Perks in particular for initiating this discussion. I'll do my best to speak on behalf of many in Parkdale when I say it's high time. It's high time we extended the protections enjoyed by most renters in Toronto to most rooming house tenants. Rooming houses and those who call them home have for far too long been subjected to stigma by their neighbors and by the city as a whole. In Parkdale, Cabbagetown, and all across the city, rooming houses, smaller unit sizes, and shared facilities provide a last bastion of affordable housing for an array of tenants who often experience exclusion from employment, often related to their mental health, physical disabilities, or age. Just as many of these tenants are faced every day with the indignity of having their more affluent neighbors actively avoid eye contact as they pass on the street, so the official plan has permitted the demolition and renoviction of rooming houses to go unnoticed and unchecked. While for a decade the right of return has been commendably ensured for renters in buildings with 6 or more units, protections for Toronto's most vulnerable type of renters have been conspicuously absent. City planners estimate that since these protections of rental units were brought into effect in 2007, they have secured the replacement and creation of almost 1,800 rental housing units. The power of this policy to save so many renters from anxieties and disruptions caused by eviction is worth celebrating. But we ought not to do so without wondering at how many rooming house units have been lost during the same period, how many tenants have been torn from the social safety nets of their neighborhoods, forced to seek out rent in more isolating and underserviced suburbs, how many of these evictees have ended up on the streets trying to find space in Toronto's already overcrowded shelters. The answer is that it's very difficult to know, as so many of these dwellings operate in a kind of legal limbo, which leaves their residents in an underprotected and understudied condition. In Parkdale, members of our Land Trust have undertaken an extensive study last summer to identify the scope of our neighbourhood's current rooming house stock and the scale of its disappearance in recent years. Our research has found that while there are currently over 2,700 rooming house dwellings in Parkdale, over the past 10 years, 347 of these rooms have been lost, often converted into single-family homes. Worse still, we found the pace of this loss has quickened in recent years, and today in Parkdale alone, more than 800 dwelling rooms are at imminent risk of disappearance. We look on these numbers in horror. In the context of a mounting citywide crisis of affordability, 345 of our most vulnerable residents have been evicted from our most affordable units to make way for a far smaller group of affluent families and renters. This is the context in which we've come to understand why Parkdale's population is shrinking, why there are citywide increases in the number of people seeking overnight shelters, and why the hopelessly long waiting list for social housing is lengthening. At the Land Trust, our current primary focus is acquiring and protecting our neighbourhood's rooming houses to prevent them from disappearing. This year, we're finally set to acquire our first property and save a cluster of our neighbours from the dread of displacement. But even in our excitement to do so, we remain sobered by the pace of displacement revealed by our research. We've come to see that in the absence of substantial government intervention and support, these problems will continue to grow faster than our solutions. That's why all of us really want to commend everyone who has put this amendment forward and is committed to keep batting for it and ensuring other councillors see eye to eye on it. But I ask you to do so with an urgency, born in the recognition that for 347 people in Parkdale alone, this amendment has already come too late. So on that note, I want to offer some concluding food for thought and ask you to seriously consider whether the drafted amendment also offered too little. Because for the almost 400 residents in Parkdale alone who live in rooming houses with 9 or less units, this amendment will offer cold comfort. I'd really like to understand better the reasoning behind choosing 10 or more units as the appropriate threshold, because I honestly found the reason given by planners in the drafted framework pretty inadequate. Here I'll quote them. The threshold of 10 dwelling rooms represents the average number of rooms in the 462 licensed rooming houses in the city as of August 2017. On this basis, it is considered to be a reasonable and appropriate threshold. So I don't understand how the fact that only half of these dwellings will continue to be at risk of disappearance qualifies this to be a reasonable and appropriate threshold. In conclusion, I strongly endorse this amendment and warmly congratulate everyone who helps move it forward, because it's high time the official plan see eye to eye with all of its renters and stop giving its most vulnerable renters the cold shoulder. But I also want to register my hopes you will seriously consider extending the protection of rooming house tenants to at least those in buildings of 8 or more units. In doing so, you'd be further extending protections and relief to almost 200 of Parkdale's most vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions of the Deputant? Councillor Campbell.
So, sorry, how many units did you say have been lost? 340?
There were about 347 that we were able to identify as having been lost in the last decade.
In the last decade?
Yeah.
And as a PhD student, I'm hoping you have this answer. How many of those were buildings with 10 or more units, or 10 or fewer units, fewer than 10 units?
I don't have the data on
You don't
that.
have the data.
I wasn't even here for that study.
No, okay. I'm not, you were
but I
probably in
can
high
tell
school
you-
then, I suppose, when that started.
No, I was in Paris.
Oh, okay.
But I can tell you that if anyone's interested, the study is called No Room for Unkept Promises, and
So I agree with what you're saying, but why did you pick 8 rather than, 7 or 6, or how did you come up with that?
so 6 would, I think, also be an acceptable amount. It would actually see completely eye to eye with the number that is prescribed for renters at present.
Right.
I mean, 8 would really help for the groups of 9 and 8, which there are a great deal of. Right. And there are less that are 7 or 6 that are to be lost. I would like to see all of these saved. I don't know the politics of what it needs to get this through. So
Okay.
I'm just saying that there are a lot of people who will still be at risk under 10.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions of the deputant? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Jeremy. Emily? Is Emily Paradis here? Oh, there you are. I didn't see you moving in the back of the room. And after that, I have Hamish. So again, Emily, 5 minutes.
Thank you.
You're here to listen.
Thanks for having me. I'm a researcher and advocate on issues of housing and homelessness, and I've been working with the Parkdale Land Trust and other organizations in the city on issues facing rooming houses and other forms of very affordable private market housing. I'm here to also express enthusiastic support for the proposed official plan amendment as an important step in protecting dwelling rooms. Alongside Councillor Perk's May 23rd motion at Council on rooming house property acquisition and modernization, this proposed amendment demonstrates welcome action by the city to address the loss of this critical stock. And the stock is important not only because it's affordable, but also because it's low barrier. Dwelling rooms offer long-term, stable, if poor quality housing for people with histories of homelessness. Part of the low barrier nature of this housing is related to informality in the landlord and tenant relationship, and this informality tends to cut 2 ways, with landlords or purchasers buying out tenants who don't realize that the dwindling stock means that they won't be able to find another room. So we often hear from tenants who accept a cash settlement from their landlord only to discover that they can't find another room to rent in their neighborhood. So loss of this low barrier and affordable stock is likely contributing to escalating demand in the shelter system. The proposed amendments aim to address both sides of this problem, both the need to prevent the loss of this dwindling stock, but also the need for supports to tenants to prevent hardship and facilitate relocation. The background report for this motion identifies alarming risk of immediate loss of as many as 200 dwelling rooms in connection with development applications. And as we've just heard from Mr. Withers, the Parkdale Rooming House study found that in Parkdale alone, 59 buildings comprising over 800 rooms are at risk of immediate loss. And a key risk in Parkdale is not necessarily from the redevelopment of these buildings that would require planning approvals, but from upscaling of dwelling rooms within the building, such as turning them into short-term rentals, student residences, and micro apartments. The upgrading of these units doesn't always require planning approval, so it's important to recognize also that the context for these changes is upscale development adjacent to the Parkdale neighborhood that's pushed up land values and rents throughout the neighborhood and has introduced new higher income rental demand that dwelling room landlords are aiming to capture. It's also important to recognize that single room occupancy takes a range of forms. So these include rooming houses and residential hotels, but they also include forms that we might not be thinking about right now, such as motels. An example would be the redeveloped motels on the Etobicoke Motel Strip that made way for the Humber Bay Shores development. We also hear that some units above stores that used to be apartments are now in single room occupancy. and that even the large purpose-built rental apartments in the inner suburbs are being subdivided into single-room occupancy arrangements. The loss of dwelling room stock is certainly not unique to Toronto. Vancouver and Chicago have enacted comprehensive policy frameworks and programs to preserve and protect SRO stock. These frameworks combine regulatory powers, planning powers, and policies with the coordination and stacking of resources from municipal and higher levels of government to address the need to protect, preserve, and expand dwelling room stock. In Montreal, there are long-standing programs funded by both the city and the province to support the nonprofit and public acquisition and operation of rooming houses. As a result of these programs, about half of Montreal's rooming house stock is now nonprofit or publicly owned and operated, and tenants report much better conditions and more affordable rent in these houses. This draft official plan amendment and last week's council motion are an important beginning to address this issue in Toronto. I particularly welcome the plan for further consultation and urge the city to emphasize direct inclusion of tenants in these consultations. At the same time, I urge that these provisions be moved forward as quickly as possible in order to address the rapid pace of dwelling room loss we are witnessing. At the same time, I have some concerns with this draft amendment.
10 seconds, please.
One has been already pointed to by Mr. Withers. The threshold of 10 or more rooms will leave many rooms in smaller, unlicensed shared accommodations unprotected. The city could take the example of Chicago, where the threshold is 5 dwelling rooms or more.
Okay. Your time's up. But
Can I just give you 4 quick?
we'll have some
4 quick
questions for you. You'll get your opportunity.
Okay.
Are there any questions from visiting councilors? Okay, bring it into committee
What was
for
your other
questions.
recommendation?
Thank you, Councillor Perks. My other recommendations, my other concern points to the requirement to replace gross floor area. This provision in Chicago has led to a reduction in the number of units, so I think we do need to be careful and cautious in the application of gross floor area versus units replacement. And given that so much of this stock has already been lost, I recommend that the city consider measures to take a prevention-oriented approach. So this would include analysis of emerging trends to meet low-income demand in the private market as traditional options are redeveloped. So this could include trends such as the subdivision of inner-city purpose-built apartments. We need to be conscious of what's happening there. We also need planning frameworks that take into account not only the affordable rooms and units that stand to be directly impacted by development, but also the longer-term impacts of upscale development on land values and rents in the surrounding neighborhood, as has happened in Parkdale. We also need proactive measures to identify, protect, preserve, and improve dwelling room stock in its many forms throughout the city with comprehensive policy frameworks and dedicated resources. And finally, we need programs to support nonprofit acquisition and operation of rooming house stock similar to Montreal model that will secure the stock as affordable, low-barrier housing in perpetuity. Thank you, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Campbell?
So you said 59 buildings were at risk with 800 rooms?
That's correct, in Parkdale alone.
In Parkdale alone. And the buildings that were, the buildings that were lost, the gentleman before said there were 340 rooms lost in the last 10 years. What replaced those buildings?
Some were
Do you know what
converted.
replaced?
According to the Parkdale Rooming House study, which I have to say, I offer this information as a reader of that study, not as a person who conducted it, and I'd welcome everyone here to read it closely. Those houses were sometimes deconverted back into single-family dwellings, but The Parkdale study also pointed to a new trend, which is the upscaling of the existing units. And that trend seems to be on the increase. So rather than reconverting into larger apartments or back into a single-family home, we see landlords taking the existing footprint of the existing small units and just dressing those up to make them appealing to a higher income.
They might have taken 8 dwelling units out and then put in three higher rent apartments.
Or they keep the 8.
Okay.
But they freshen up the finishes and rent them out to, for example, students.
Okay.
Or people who would like a micro apartment, people who wish they could live in a condo in Liberty Village but can't quite afford that and are willing to accept the same footprint in Parkdale.
So do you see it as a problem if somebody renovates 8 rooms and makes them nicer? Because I mean, the alternative is they're run down and they go for a lower price, of course, right?
Well, if we allow the market to just dictate the way in which these rooms progress, that's why we see market interventions in cities like Chicago, Vancouver, and Montreal that assure the nonprofit operation in perpetuity of affordable housing. The concern with making these rooms nicer is that the aim is to increase the rents and to rent to a higher income populace. And because this causes the whole dwelling room stock to diminish, the folks who need that affordable and low barrier form of housing that rooming houses provide, they have nowhere else to go. And what we see very directly, we're witnessing it in Toronto right now, is the escalation of demand in the shelter system.
So last question, how did the other cities with which you're familiar, how did they regulate the improvements or upscaling of rooms on a one-to-one basis? So if you have 8 rooms that are run down, how do you prevent them from improving them? How do you prevent them from improving them and charging more? How do those cities do that?
How do you prevent rent evictions is what you're asking. Well, and Vancouver has some good frameworks for this, as does Chicago. Vancouver's had frameworks to protect its single room occupancy stock since 2003.
Yes,
they require permissions and they place stringent requirements on owners of single room occupancy.
It would be
buildings.
just as we do with our rental replacement policy.
That's
Okay,
correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, Emily. Thank you for coming. Hamish, you're up next.
Thank you for your time. We're in the middle of a very severe housing and affordability crisis, and the inflation has applied to some of us that don't have as much money. It's kind of brutal. There's a lot of irregular housing and situations. We don't have necessarily the ability to know how the systems work. I found that the province and to some degree the city is kind of useless on actually providing protections and guidance and preserving housing. They'll help you out, but help you out of the housing rather than help you stay there. So I would totally support upgrading the protections and not just in rooming houses and official rooming houses, but more irregular housing that you can sometimes have in loft-style buildings, artist encampments, et cetera, or not encampments, but you know, we have very few options in some ways, and very few of these opportunities. Like 48 Able was in near Parkdale was a situation about what 20-odd years ago where that should have been preserved more as an artist loft building. I would urge that you go down a little bit from merely 10 to 8. Sometimes everything is needed. I'm also worried that sometimes above the commercial stores on our main streets, those protections aren't necessarily as strong as they could be for protecting housing. In some situations, we've lost housing, like where I was at Brunswick. Around the corner, there was a pair of buildings owned by one of them owned by the city that's been vacant for a decade or so. It's pretty frustrating.
in order to actually move this along, because sometimes you actually do need to repair a building and get in there and do appropriate upgrades. I think we should be investing in a more aggressive nonprofit public ownership situation. And yes, it's going to be costly. I don't always think maybe the city should be the best person to, best body to work on it. But I think there is a need for some form of support, nonprofit public ownership, as other cities are doing. And it'd be a much better value for the taxpayers' money to avoid doing a suspect subway extension out in Scarborough, where we're squandering the billions, putting some of it into this ability to actually provide better housing. And certainly with Mr. Ford and the election today, I certainly think forwards would be backwards
can you
again.
stay on the topic?
I am, sir.
That we're sending this information out for public consultation, and then it will come back to us.
Okay, well,
that's what the report says.
But as other deputants have been saying, the crisis is very severe right now, sir. So yes, go ahead, let's do it. But there's another point that Mr. Ford was talking about scooping the subway systems because, hey, they're paid for. Older buildings are already paid for too. So why don't we go after them, some of the existing apartments? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Mr. Wilson? Not seeing any. Are there any questions of staff by non-members of committee? This is really responding to the committee's request, which is Councillor Perks put forward, to go out and get a policy similar to the way that we protect rental apartments, to do the same on rooming houses. And this is going out for public consultation on Councillor Perks' efforts, which are great. So are there members of committee that have questions of staff? Non-members of committee, oh, you have questions of staff? Okay, because this is on our going out for consultation, and we'll come back after the
I just
consultation.
have one quick question.
No problem.
I want to know why they decided on 10 units and rather than 8 units or a number lower.
Through the chair, we did an analysis of the existing rooming and licensed rooming houses across the city, and it is correct. We found that the median was 9, I think, and the mean was 11. And so as a starting point for consultation, we selected the number of 10, and that captures 42% of the existing licensed rooming houses across the city.
What would 8 capture?
8 would capture somewhere in the order of about 65%.
Okay, that's it.
No questions.
I told you to be quick.
I don't mind. I'm just trying to focus us on what it is.
I'm focused.
Usually, yes. Any other questions? Don't see any. Councillor Perks, you wish to speak on this?
Thank you very much. I'll get this done as quick as I can. In Parkdale, as you heard, we've lost about 400 of these units. I'm aware of places in other wards, like the Waverley Hotel and so on and so forth, of at least another 400 units, and that's within the last 2 or 3 years. For context, those 1,000 lost units, given that we are not building anything in this income range at all, anywhere in the city, and there are no free units out there, the option for those 900 or 1,000 people that I'm aware of, and I know many of their names, because they come to me and ask, where do I go, wind up in our shelter system. So currently, there are about 8,000 people in the shelter system. The fact that we didn't do this 2 years ago accounts for almost 1,000 of those people. There's an urgency here. So while the staff report says that they want to go out and have consultation and come back for the second quarter, I'm going to be watching this, and I'm really hoping they can come back in January. And I really, really hope they will. And I'll be watching. Oh, look, they're here. Okay. So there are some issues outstanding. There's a lot of complexity about dwelling rooms and units and how they relate and the square footage and the number and all that stuff. And I encourage everyone who's got questions and issues about that to take part in the consultation. And let's see if we can get this to be a little bit tighter, but let's get her done. I am heartsick at the number of times I have had people come and say, my unit is going to disappear, I am going to be homeless, and the city has said they won't and can't do anything. And it has to stop.
Councillor Bailo.
I'm going to be very brief, but I think I want to echo Councillor Perks' remarks, and I certainly hope that this is the beginning of this council and next council taking this issue really serious. Not only are we losing units, we have lots of illegal units. I mean, a few years ago, we had at the Affordable Housing Office a program to, even in the area where they're legalized, to help legalize a lot of these units. So there's that issue as well. And then we have thousands of people that are living in illegal units. We had a death in an illegal rooming house of a student not too long ago, and it's about time that we have the political leadership in these council chambers to finally deal with this issue. This is a form of housing that needs to be protected. It needs to be licensed. It needs to be regularized, and we need to ensure that people have decent living conditions in this city of Toronto. We need it. We need it for all kinds of different people, from students around our universities to downtown, for people that for years and years have been living in these houses, and has been a form of housing in many parts of the city, Parkdale being one of them. So let's get our heads around this, I certainly hope that this is certainly the beginning of a serious discussion, and that this is not the only issue that we need to tackle around rooming houses. There's, like I said, 3 big issues. It's the ones that we're losing, it's ensuring that we're doing everything we can to legalize the ones that we have, and ensure that the parts of the city that don't have a framework around rooming houses, that we create a framework around those rooming houses.
Other members that wish to speak? I'm going to speak. I have an amendment. The amendment is we change second quarter, not to FERS, but to the first quarter with a T. January. And I am placing the amendment, first of all, to remind people what's in front of us, which is the fact that we now have a policy that we're looking at to go out for public consultation on and bring that back. If you note in the decision history, the Affordable Housing Committee actually asked on September 2nd of 2015 for single rooming occupancy buildings with 15 or more dwelling units to examine a policy option, and we didn't. And it came back at Councillor Perks's urging in October, when we all of last year adopted it, and now it's already June, and it took 6 months to come back with the policy. Well, we can't have it take a long time further. It's absolutely necessary that if you want to have a city that allows all people of all different income levels or support levels to have a place to live, that you can't allow the gentrification and the redevelopment of the city to continually to push them to somewhere else where they can't afford to live and the services aren't there. But those that own the properties have a right to know that we have these policies, so they know when they own them what they have to do as well, because everybody always thinks now as that piece of land is the golden goose that's going to pay them out, but oftentimes it's hurting others. My colleagues have spoken well, Councillor Bailo and Councillor Perks, and are huge advocates for this, but I wanted to move this motion to show that all of us are supportive of this, and we all want to push our staff to put this as one of the top items of the agenda, so we can try as every day, every week, and every month goes on to have a policy in place to protect those affordable units that so many people in the city depend upon. So I will move my, oh, why don't I just move the item as amended? Can I do it that way? Okay, I'll move my amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. The item is amended. Could I have a recorded vote?
All those in favor of adopting the item as amended, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Diciano, Councillor Shiner, Councillor Fillion, Councillor Perks. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody's patience for letting us move things around on the agenda. Now, I have one more item that I would like to deal with, if I could, quickly. It is item number 5. It is the Unilever Precinct Planning Study. I only had one speaker, Mr. Jarofsky, but he is somewhat satisfied with not speaking. If we adopt it, he really wanted to tell us all the huge benefits, which we've heard before, but I think my colleague will speak a little bit on his behalf. So with your permission, I would like to move that we deal with item 5 now. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So do we have any questions of staff by non-members? Any questions of staff by members? Speakers, non-members?
Thank you. I do have a motion.
Councillor Fletcher, you have a motion and you wish
Yes,
to
I do,
speak. It's
that
yours.
you've seen, Mr. Chair, and Chief Planner help me write that, and it's simply to, once we get it up there, defer the recommendation 8, which is all the Section 37, and just have a look at trying to achieve better dollars in the same envelope for some affordable off-site affordable housing. So that would be that motion today. Not changing, nothing else. And I just have to say this is a big, big project. I think we all know that, and I think that Mr. Jarofsky and his team have spoken to a number of councillors on this committee, and you all know that it's a 62-acre master plan. That is just a massive, massive project in the city of Toronto. We're dealing with that. We're dealing with the zoning bylaw, official plan amendments. This is now adding office use into the Eastern Avenue Employment District and adding a lot of jobs to go into those offices. When this passes, Council, a few other things as far as a couple of other matters that we can press go on starting this project, starting with the existing soap factory building and starting that conversion to jobs in the east end of the city. There are 20 acres here that belong to the city. They're under the scope of the master plan. How they will be triggered is still under discussion. As you know, we have to find replacement sites for the important services that are servicing the south end of the city: transportation, licensing, parks, everyone, and particularly solid waste is working out of there. This is 50,000 jobs. That's the target for this site. It's a massive new, they call it the downtown of the east, but it's just a massive new office complex in the East End to be built out over a number of years. And it's a job zone, 100%. It's one of the reasons why we've kept the Eastern Avenue Employment District intact, because these are the jobs of the future. These are the jobs for kids and grandkids, people in this room. And we have to maintain that as an employment use. But there's other incredible things that are happening exactly around here. We have the works for the mouth of the Don happening exactly in the same area, transforming the river. And part of this project will also be part of that transformation in the river works, in floodproofing this site and floodproofing all of the Eastern Avenue employment and all of Leslieville. There's the Gardner takedown. It's right here again. And we'll be removing the Gardner. This will open up this site. It will open up the Portlands. It's such an important decision that was made to transform the Gardner and allow for this type of growth. I know you all know that Smart Track has a station here, and that we're under discussion on that. It's in here in the report, as well as a downtown relief line. This is what a job zones bring. It brings transit. They are very much woven together in this report. The Broadview streetcar, Broadview Avenue will be extended, and the Broadview streetcar will eventually go down to meet the Villiers Island, the Portlands redevelopment. So I can't tell you how exciting this is to have all of this going on within, called the North Waterfront, or just north of the Portlands. It is truly transformative. I can't underscore that enough. It is transformative. It's the biggest city building site underway. It's the biggest long-term economic driver actually in the city of Toronto of 62 acres. And it's being built from the ground up. Currently there is one building there. It's the former Lever Brothers soap plant. This area entirely will be transformed and be made a very modern and exciting place, a lively spot for those who work there and those who are living in the neighborhood. And it's been many, many years in the making. I just checked 2014, it started with a pre-application and community conversation, and the application came in 16 and 17. The city took it on, and we've had 5 major open houses. We've been at this committee many times with status reports, because this is not a simple application. And I think for Mr. Jarofsky and First Gulf, this is the legacy project of a lifetime. And I just want to remark here and note the incredible work by the developer and his team, and that would be Mr. Jurovsky, David Goring, Renee Gomes, George Dark, beautiful, beautiful master plan, all the river works, the public art, and everything else. And to the city staff who have poured hours and their hearts into this, particularly Carly Bowman doing a fantastic job, Kyle Connect, Mike Williams around the employment features, and so many from so many divisions. It's a very, very complicated project, but it is a sensational, transformative project I think the city will be proud of, and I'm very happy that we'll be dealing with that. And Mr. Chair, I know you're going to support this motion and move the report today.
Thank you. What I didn't do is I didn't ask Mr. Jurovsky if he could signal to the staff if he was okay with not speaking. Yes, thank you. I didn't want anyone to say after that I overstepped my boundaries on it. And I don't think he was really okay with not speaking, but he is okay with not speaking. Are there other members of the committee that wish to speak? Councillor Barlow, you're simply placing a motion?
Motion, I think.
And I have a motion to place, to adopt the revised recommendations. And then I will take a minute because
No, we can't do 9.
pardon me?
Oh, it's okay.
Because I did ask Mr. Jurovsky if there was a way we could move this on and not work, but it still has to, what my colleague has said in an unusually quiet voice, because Councillor Fletcher is often a little bit louder when she speaks, when she's so passionate about things. This is in what my colleague, along with Great Gulf and Mr. Jurovsky and planning staff have been able to achieve in the report coming here and creating a new office community of 10 million square feet is phenomenal. It's the largest going forward in the GTA. It creates employment in the downtown. It's not residential, which is what we always see everybody trying to do with land. And it is I believe together it's been a fantastic achievement. It's phenomenal what we've been able to do this, and in a quite reasonable and short period of time for an application this large. It is the dedication and hard work of my colleague, of the applicant, and of city staff to bring this forward now in this way, in such a short matter for such a difficult and comprehensive development, as my colleague said, extending Broadview, a smart track station, the relief line going through it, redevelopment of the area, getting affordable housing policies into it, protecting the jobs and expanding on that in the area. It's an example of what can be done when people want to work together and see the city grow together. And I really want to thank Mr. Jurovsky and thank the city staff for all of their extremely hard work of bringing this together and working with my colleague to make sure it comes forward in a good time and as a benefit to everyone, because it is an outstanding achievement. And normally, if we had the time, I would love to hear the presentations about how great it is. But as we're short, I'd love to get it moved on and approved and go to the next steps of seeing it come to reality. So I am moving the technical amendments that we have to do. What do I have to vote on, Madam Clerk? We have the motion from Councillor Barlow. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We have the amendment I had to move because I do what clerks tells me to do. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Then we have the item as amended. Oh, wait a sec. Was that the item as amended? Yeah. Then I want to vote on that on a recorded vote. All those in favor? This is the item as amended.
All those in favor for a recorded vote? Councillor Bailao, Councillor Campbell, Councillor DiCiano, Councillor Shiner, Councillor Fillion, Councillor Perks. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Dealt with. Thank you very much to everyone for their help on that. So we have been waiting to come forward with Midtown in Focus. And we have a few deputants on it. There's just a couple of dozen. So why don't, and so we have that, and is it Toronto Green Standards as well, the other item is left?
This one and this one, Councillor DiCiano's holding that.
Okay, and the Green Standards, okay. We won't be dealing with the green standards. We'll try and deal with it after lunch, but there are a lot of people that have been sitting here, so we want to start with the deputations. So, if I can get some order in the room still, I have quite a number of people that wish to speak to Midtown in Focus. The first, for those that are here, it's 5 minutes. You have your full 5 minutes to speak. If you are multiple people or repeating things or wish to make points, and you can do it in less than that, we would appreciate it, because we are somewhat stuck with our ability to stay long today and won't be able to stay late because of the fact that there is a provincial election going on.
We should begin with this announcement only.
So, I think so. So I have to also read, the Planning and Growth Management Committee is holding a statutory special public meeting in accordance with Section 26 of the Planning Act for item PG 30-4, Midtown in Focus final report. Then the first speaker I have is Bob Murphy. Then I have Erwin Snydzenz, and then I have Jane Pepino. Is Mr. Murphy here? Mr. Murphy. Now, in the room here, to my colleagues and members of staff and others, can I get some order in the room so Mr. Murphy can be heard?
Councillor Matlow was quoted in the North Toronto Post in May as saying, while he agrees with the intent behind the Places to Grow Act, nothing in the provincial legislation ensured that adequate social services and infrastructure would keep up with growth. Was the Places to Grow Act enacted with no planning behind it at all? Or did the development industry choose to ignore the expectations set out in the legislation that growth be rational and balanced? In L versus Ontario, Ontario Reports Volume 83, 3rd Series, 2007, at page 521, the Ontario Court of Appeal cited the House of Lords and the Supreme Court of Canada in applying the Cooper-Ann's test. Was harm reasonably foreseeable? Was there a relationship of proximity between the parties?
Sir, I have to stop you for a moment. I've lost quorum, and it's a statutory public meeting, and I can't work that way. So I need Councillor DiCiano, Councillor Fillion, or Councillor Perks to come back to the room. Councillor Fillion, if you're within earshot, Councillor Perks, Councillor DiCiano, I don't know if you've just gone to the facilities, but I cannot continue without quorum in the room. No, you're wrong. Yes. It's a public meeting. Councillor Fillion, thank you. Sorry, sir, please go on.
Section 15 of the Places to Grow Act, the government gave itself, municipalities and planners, blanket immunity against liability arising from bad planning. But subsection 15.7 does not expressly shield developers or their hired gun planners from liability arising from aggressive development. If, as Mr. Matlow suggests, Midtown in Focus is about infrastructure and services, why does it go even farther than the Places to Grow Act and confer extreme density rights? I had an assistant deputy minister tell me that our problem is that our zoning bylaw hasn't kept up to date with our official plan, but the growth plan already overrides our growth plan, our official plan and zoning bylaw. It is Section 1B of the Places to Grow Act that stipulates that growth be rational and balanced. Where it is not, it is contrary to the statute law that provides the template for the growth. When I was at the February session of Midtown in Focus, I saw what looked like representatives of the sewer and water divisions, and I reminisced with them about my time with Ann Johnston, dealing with sewer backups in Forest Hill, leading to the installation of a holding tank in Memorial Park on Chaplain Crescent. And I wondered if someday soon we may see a holding tank being constructed under, say, Davisville Park. All there is in this plan is a few cliches on page 44. Will there be holding tanks under individual condos? If not, why not? Is there an engineering report on the cumulative effects of sewage from Young Eglinton, Young Davisville, young St. Clair, young Bloor, the cumulative effects down the system. It will be many years before sewers can be reconstructed, new sewers can be constructed, and new schools built. The broader question is, do working people owe it to condo developers to subsidize their greed? If the growth met the Section 1B standard of rational and balance, would Midtown in focus be necessary? If we continue to build extreme densities and sewers back up, is the city immune from liability under Section 15? Can the Places to Grow Act, for instance, compel the city to give a permit where there is non-compliance with the building code? Well, of course not. So where issues of liability, such as sewer backups, are concerned, they are beyond the competence of the OMB or lab. That is a point of law. The conditions are there to impose a duty of care as set out in the Cooper-Ann's test. The harm of sewer backups is foreseeable. There is a relationship of proximity between the City of Toronto and its tax-paying residents. Without the validation of the Places to Grow Act, it would be unlawful to approve density where 2I of the Planning Act has not been met. I argued in my written submission that where the growth plan is invalid, where the growth plan is involved, ministerial consent is necessary to step beyond the Planning Act. Sewer backups, though, have nothing to do with the Places to Grow Act. Would insurers refuse to pay claims because damage will have been foreseeable on the part of the city? The ministry did not step beyond bullying municipal councils to consider all the possibilities of the Places to Grow Act and its growth plan, which, after today, may be changed or repealed. The direction set out in Section 1B of the Places to Grow Act expresses the legislation expectation that growth be rational and balanced, which the development industry chose to ignore. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from my colleague, Councillor Robinson.
Hi, thanks for coming today. Are you aware the Young Eglinton area has exceeded all provincial growth targets?
Young Eglinton has exceeded all common sense.
Okay. And it's one of the fastest growing, if not top 2 in the city?
I wouldn't argue with you on that.
Are you aware that there's a number of proposals to put in a number of additional towers along Eglinton, Yonge, Roehampton, and Broadway?
I spoke on some of them. I spoke there. They gave 150 Eglinton East 7 additional floors just to withdraw an appeal at OMB.
Do you know how many, at the end of this exercise, if this was to be put into place, how many people there would be per hectare at Yonge and Eglinton? Do you have any sense of that?
Before this latest clump of proposals, I remember at one point between Yonge and Redpath, there were 300 floors of new condos proposed alone on that one block.
How do people in the Yonge Eglinton neighborhood feel right now? What is the sentiment out there that I certainly hear about on an hourly basis?
You know, well, I do. They go to community consultation meetings, and I repeated what was said at a community consultation meeting at Community Council, and Councillor Vaughan asked a planner named Burkholder about it, and they had a little huddle at the back and said, oh, they will deal with the problems on the subway with signaling improvements. So they listen very quietly and then ignore us.
How many trains do people wait to get on? I certainly hear about it all the time. And there's reliability issues, but there's also capacity issues. So from your knowledge, if you're a transit user, how many trains do people wait at peak hours to get onto the physically get onto the train?
Well, I avoid the subway by going all the way through Leaside around it all. But I remember my father telling me once he waited 5 or 6 trains at Yonge and Shepherd, let alone Yonge and Eglinton.
Right. Are you aware that some people are traveling north to get on at stations north of Yonge and Eglinton to actually get on trains? Have you heard those stories?
I've seen people going north.
Have you heard stories about people not being able to get water pumped up to the top of their buildings because the infrastructure issues that are becoming at a crisis point?
Well, I remember the dangers of this because when Forest Hill first joined the city, you couldn't get water pressure in a lot of places because their pipes were so narrow, and that you will have at least pressure problems, if not capacity problems.
Are you aware of the very severe park deficit particularly in the northeast quadrant? I know you don't live in that area, but the northeast quadrant, are you aware of the lack of green space, public realm, and parks, which none are being proposed on the parks front in this proposal before
In my
us?
school days, I was with Parks and Rec, so I have great familiarity with Eglinton Park and even the little tiny park at Red Path, the top of Red Path at Erskine. But that's pretty well it when you get to parks. The next park is Davisville. There's a few parkettes on Belsize, and there's talk about the park at Yonge and Eglinton once the bus
But I'm asking you about the northeast quadrant. There's literally Red Path Park, which is the size of your table, times 3 or 4.
Councillor Robinson, he's supposed to be telling us.
Okay, so but I want to be specific
You
in the
asking him
northeast.
if he
He's
has
grilling me.
concerns. I know that, but as part of what your deputation should have been in due respect, and we have many deputants today in a very short period.
Okay, I'll let you off.
Thank
Let
you.
you off easy.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions which we wish the deputant to tell us that he hasn't told us already? Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
I have Erwin Schneidson. Is Erwin here?
That's close enough.
Well, then I'm doing okay today.
You are.
Please, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So my name is Erwin Snidgens.
I'm close.
And one of my goals in life is to live 1 million hours. And I'm at 65.7% of my goal. So that means I have over 30% still to live in my own home. I also live at 38 Helendale, which has been inundated with the assault of condos. And I represent the homeowners on Helendale Avenue. I was at a Midtown in Focus open house to present something that perhaps has never been done before. The development of a group of old homes, one of them is mine, by the homeowners themselves in the context of the redevelopment that is going on all around us. So on Helendale, there are right now 2 condos being built that are over 23, 25 stories high. But this is not a redevelopment by a developer who has assembled a series of lots and put them together. These are 6 separate owned homes that will redevelop as individual homeowners. Then the planner told me that the city had bought homes on Helendale and duplex, which they will demolish for parkland. Then I saw the map that suggested they demolished the entire block of homes on the north side of Helendale and the south side of Montgomery, including mine, for parkland. So on page 20 on Schedule 3 to Amendment 405, the planner set out how they will go about doing this. The phrase, including but not limited to, does not preclude, rule out expropriation. It is necessary that if council is going to spend money it really doesn't have buying homes, which they will then demolish, are entitled to some certainty that any purchase of our homes will be voluntary on our part and that you will not expropriate. We also want assurance that the homeowners on Helendale are able to rebuild their properties to enhance their neighborhood and that the city will not prevent them from doing so. Right now, my home is R1, which means basically one time a lot. And so I want to build a townhouse because there are townhomes on our street now, 3-story and 4-story. I want to do a 4-story townhouse on my street, on my lot. And I want to make sure that I'm not prevented from doing so because the whole street has gone chaos. So nobody's going to believe that you, when you say you need more money, when you spend the taxpayers' money buying a house to demolish them. So that the Midtown and Focus Group have any mandate from council to do this. Furthermore, I have been told that also because the city has identified an interest in my house, the city will not allow me to improve it. While developers are building 50-plus stories around this neighborhood, I cannot improve a house that I own before the subway was even built. I expect that my rights will be respected, and the homeowners on Helendale rights will be respected as well. I expect I will be afforded the same property rights as any other property owner in the city. And if you want to build a park all around me, and as long as they are willing to sell, I will not object. But I expect you to acknowledge my right to remain my house and to improve it so I can build a 4-story townhouse for my handicapped daughter and her daycare and my children and so on. So what right do the panelists have to do without explicit direction from council to put people out of their homes for a park so that condos could be built? Thank you.
Thank you. I was just trying to find the location of Helendale because I couldn't spell it right.
Well, it's in the shadow of all the condos down there. It's at right across from the library.
Okay.
So that whole thing, when I went to these consultations, they never had that as designated park. It was about sort of beautifying the area. And the last meeting I went, I saw all of a sudden this green spot where my house used to be.
So you're on the other side of, you're west of.
Yeah. It's not as dense as east.
West of Duplex.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there?
Meantime, there's a huge park down the road.
Questions of the deputant non-members?
Hi there.
Hi.
Councillor Matlow.
I also, there's a lot of good in this plan, but there are some changes that are going to have to be made. Some of the things that I'm looking at are, I'm concerned about some of the heights that are recommended in the plan that I'm working with the chair to address, along with the transit capacity load and a number of other issues in the area. Have you worked with your local councillor on maybe looking for a tweak or any changes that affect your property directly? Are there things that we could work on that front? Or
well, I sent her this information that I just presented here, and she assured me that there wouldn't be any expropriation.
No, that is true. Yeah,
but it's not written. It's not written in here. You know. Great. So in other words, all the homes are sold except mine, and then they.
So are you looking for some clear assurance that the city has no plans to expropriate your home?
That's right, and assurances that I can build a 4-story because right next to me is a 4-story stacked townhouse that the condos over Montgomery, the K station, and there's 3-story townhouses, and I basically have a small lot. So it's 25 by 65, so the only way I can sort of improve my extended family is by building up.
Okay, I'll connect you with the right staff to talk to you about
well, I've talked to them, but they were looking at the same thing, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But I have the same issue with the height of these condos and the amount of condos on my street.
Yeah.
Right, so.
Well, and again, are you aware that these are our recommendations?
Right, but this is.
But we have an opportunity to approve amendments or motions that could address, I think, our shared concerns around the impacts of some of the density that would be allowed under this proposal, to try to bring down the heights and make it more reasonable so we can allow for the services and infrastructure to keep up with the growth. So we're looking at
But I also want to have the ability to also improve my home, but not R1. It should be like an R4 because you got R50, you know, with all these condos on my street.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the deputant? Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
The next deputant I have is Jane Pepino, and then after that, John Bossons, and then David Bronskill. Is Jane here? There you are.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. In an effort to assist you with efficiency, may I suggest that Mr. Bronskill be allowed to take my place? I will then take Mr. Bronskill's place in the order. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to committee that we believe that there are very significant legal issues with respect to the suggestion that this proceed under Section 26 of the Planning Act. And to the extent that Mr. Bronskill, after consultation with members of the bar, can address those generally, I can save time, as can others following me, in addressing those matters.
Mr. Bronskill, please.
Thank you, sir.
Forward if you guys are agreeing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We're trying to get through this quickly today, but we are specifically not going to cut anybody's time off for anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Mr. Bronskill, and so I appreciate your indulgence in going first, sir. My comments to this committee, sir, are not going to be addressing the contents of Midtown in Focus, and I'm not here to suggest any amendments to it, and I'm not here, in fact, speaking on behalf of any specific property. There is some correspondence from me on the record for some properties. I'm here to speak to the general proposition and recommendation number 3 and 4 to you to proceed under Section 26 of the Planning Act, and to suggest to you that that is an invalid use of Section 26 of the Planning Act. And I would respectfully request either a deferral or an opportunity to meet with city staff, and it may be city legal, to discuss those concerns in more detail, with perhaps a report to come back either to this committee or to City Council. Let me also be clear, that concern is not a suggestion that the city shouldn't update the secondary plan for the Yonge and Eglinton area. That's not what I am suggesting to the committee. What I am instead saying is that this is a late choice and recommendation, and an incorrect choice and recommendation to you. If I can very quickly track some of the chronology for Midtown in Focus, as you may well know, a review of Midtown of Yonge Eglinton began in July 2012, the formation of the Midtown Planning Group. That was at the request of Councillor Matlow and then Councillor Stintz. The intent of that planning group was to create a comprehensive strategy for planning in the Yonge and Eglinton area. In August of 2014, City Council adopted recommendations related to parks, open space, and streetscape, and in June of 2015, OPA 289 was adopted. And in all of those instances, there was no reference to the Midtown in Focus review proceeding as an official plan amendment initiated under Section 26. And I'm going to come back to that language, because that's important language. An official plan and amendment or an official plan review initiated under Section 26. In July of 2016, Council considered a status report. Again, there was no suggestion that this was initiated under Section 26, part of the city's OP review, part of a conformity exercise. The first reference I could find to it was in October of 2017. And in a staff report that came forward to committee and then to Council, and I quote on page 9, staff are determining whether the proposed official plan amendment updating the Yonge Eglinton secondary plan will proceed under Section 17 or Section 26 of the Planning Act. So even at that time, there had been no determination as to which way to proceed. The second sentence, given that the new growth plan came into effect July 1, 2017, it may be necessary for the OPA to proceed as a Section 26 amendment requiring provincial approval as part of a conformity exercise. There is nothing through the province's enactment of the growth plan in 2017 that would make it necessary for the Yonge Eglinton review to proceed under Section 26 as a conformity exercise. It was not initiated as such, and it has not been continued as such. The language that I read to you earlier about whether it's initiated under Section 26, that's in fact in the definition of a municipal comprehensive review in the very document that the city staff in that report suggests may be the trigger for a Section 26 review. So the growth plan itself says if you're doing a municipal comprehensive review, it can be an OP and it can be an OPA. It can be something like this, but it has to be initiated by the city under Section 26. And I'm just suggesting to you the record when we go through it does not at any time say Yonge Eglinton was initiated under Section 26. What are the implications? I acknowledge very plainly to this committee the big implication that worries me and many of my clients when it goes to the province is that decision of the province cannot be appealed. I acknowledge that up front. That is one of the main concerns. I would suggest to residents and this committee that should also be your concern. That decision, when it's made by the province, will be made by the minister, whoever that is. And we won't know who the Minister of Municipal Affairs is, frankly, until we've all finished voting today and a cabinet is selected, and there will be a new Minister of Municipal Affairs. It is up to that minister to make a decision, and that minister can make modifications to your secondary plan, and they cannot be appealed. And so I just want to understand, that's the implications of what we're talking about. So I am suggesting that recommendations 3 and 4 should be deleted. You should make a decision under Section 17. There would be appeals. Those appeals would go to, I know, sir, I don't know quite where I am.
It's 5:06, so you're past your time.
Thank you, sir. I will finish in 20 seconds, sir, if that's all right.
Yeah.
They will proceed to the new tribunal. There are time limits on those appeals, and there is deference to your decision now under the new rules. So I would suggest that's the correct course that you should take, is to follow Section 17 and not Section 26. And thank you, sir. I hadn't realized I was over 5. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I didn't know it wasn't working, Mr. Bronskill. You do have questions. So
yes, sir. I expected a few.
Thank you.
Councillor Matlow and then Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bronskill, thank you for your submission. I must say I respectfully disagree with your conclusion, but I just wonder, and again, I do say this with all due respect, but you work for the development industry.
Councillor Matlow, please. Ask him a question.
There's a question.
No, I don't know. I really don't want statements in advance of questions. And I'm going to be fairly firm with my 2 colleagues today. I have extreme time limitations, and I want to allow everyone the opportunity to speak here. It doesn't matter what you
My
think.
next sentence will clarify why I just said that.
Ask, please, to both of my colleagues, to you and to Councillor Robinson. I don't want to lead on people that are here to get answers that you want. I just want to get answers to questions to clarify what their
Mr. Chair, you will see where I'm going with this direction. So, given that you work as a lawyer for the development industry, you will have an interest in the outcome of this. Do you have an objective legal opinion from a lawyer who doesn't work for developers?
Sir, through you, Mr. Chair, first of all, I am a lawyer who works for certain developers. I am also a lawyer who works for resident associations, for individual residents, and for those, in fact, who have attended at TLAB, which we were discussing earlier, to oppose Committee of Adjustment matters. So I have to reject the characterization that I am a developer who works only for the development industry. I have clients who are developers, and I recognize that. I also have to reject very strongly the insinuation that I would not come to this committee and give my objective legal opinion to this committee based on the client I am representing. And with all due respect, sir, it's a little bit offensive. That is my objective legal opinion.
So
let's stop for a moment, please.
Again,
we don't applaud in the room. My colleagues don't applaud when they have something that's there, and I would appreciate the same decorum being in place. I will be sure, and I will continue to make sure it's a fair question and answer, but I don't need that from anyone that's sitting in the room.
So but I ask you again, not to suggest that you're not being objective, but I'm asking you, given the fact that you do work for developers, right, and there could be an apprehension of bias assumed,
no, there couldn't, but go ahead.
Sorry, but the question's been offered. The question's been answered.
Do you have a legal opinion?
Yes, I have a legal opinion, and it's mine, and it's objective.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Councillor, I'm going to lean back just so I can...
Oh, it's hard to see. I know there's all that equipment. That's fine. So I guess you've said that you're not happy that the plan cannot be appealed. And so I guess what would your take on the neighbors? And there are a number of neighbors here. Some of them still aren't aware of it, but there are neighbors here, and I think they think that's a good part. There's certainly some challenges with this plan, but that is a good part, that it can't be appealed. So if you lived in the neighborhood, what would you think would be the take of the neighbors who live in the area?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand them enjoying or appreciating and relying on the fact that it cannot be appealed. It doesn't change my view of the legislation. I would say a second thing, there are going to be amendments here today, as I understand it from some of the questions. If I'm residents and landowners, I would like to have notice of those and an opportunity to review them, an opportunity to come back and make deputations to this committee on those amendments, especially when there's no right of appeal. and especially when this is allegedly proceeding under Section 26. And the third thing I would say to those residents, if I was advising them as a lawyer, in my objective opinion, be careful what you wish for, because you cannot control the amendments that the new Minister of Municipal Affairs may or may not make to the document. There may be none. There may be none. But there may be some, and we don't know which way they would go in any direction. Those amendments similarly could not be appealed, and so it could cut both ways. So absolutely, through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor, I appreciate that that would give them comfort, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe something that doesn't give them comfort, and I'd like your take on this, is that my understanding just recently is the plan cannot be appealed, but applications can be amended after 2 years. Are you aware of that 2-year window?
Yes.
And what's your feeling on the 2 years? Because I've had residents say it should be 5.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have to be careful. I don't know that I have an opinion on whether the 2 years is the right limit or not, whether it should be 1, whether it should be 2, whether it should be 5. I would simply say that that 2-year moratorium on applications to amend the secondary plan would apply whether or not this decision is made under Section 17 or Section 26. So once any part of the secondary plan comes into effect, that moratorium would kick in under either path. That will give people some comfort. That will give a bit of a stand-down period. It's the legislation, and I don't have, frankly, an opinion as to whether it should be 3, 4, or 5. It's the legislation, and that's what it is.
So if there's these dark purple squares
Yes.
have, 56, 52, 48 heights for towers, if after a 2-year period, a developer could come in and amend that and go higher, is that correct? Is that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they could come in after that 2-year period, file an official plan amendment application. That official plan amendment application would then be reviewed under the balance of the official plan policies, under the growth plan, and under the provincial policy statement. There would be a decision based on a recommendation coming forward out of the Community Council to Council, and that decision based on the changes in Bill 139 would be subject to some degree of deference, because that is the new standard under Bill 139. That's the process that would be followed in such an instance.
After 2 years?
After 2 years.
the 2-year mark?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
thank you, that's informative.
Thank you, Councillor.
Are there other members with questions? So I will, Mr. Bronskill.
Yes, sir.
You prefer the current system of an appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board if we make changes here. That's the crux of the deputation over the opportunity that the city believes it has to use Section 26.
And Sir Mike, with your indulgence, I was going to ask one clarification. No, and I was only going to ask one clarification to your question. When you say the current system, I want to make sure you're talking about a post-Bill 139 environment.
Post-Bill 139, but still, it's an appeal system where it's not decided.
Yes, sir.
So, under Section 36, the minister has to respond within 6 months?
Under which section?
Section 26. If we put it forward, how long does the minister have to respond?
Sir, I'd have to pull up my planning act to tell you how long they have to respond. I actually don't, I'm not sure there is such a time limit for them to have to respond. I would have to pull it out, sir, and double check for you. I didn't bring that with me.
So if it is 6 months?
Yeah, assume it's 6, assume it's 9, whatever it is, sir, I'm happy to accept a date.
If it is 6 months, and you heard us this morning about problems we had with our, some of our zoning bylaws being 4, 5, 6 years in the appeal.
Yes, sir.
Process. If it went that way, does it not then make it a window of 6 months plus 2 years before a variance could be filed to an official plan? And then does that really not provide, in some ways, a better avenue to have a decision, a framework, and then be able to know where you're going instead of the current system, which is a decision, an appeal, and then 2 different frameworks that we're looking at?
So no, for a couple of reasons. One, I just fundamentally disagree that the city can proceed under Section 26. But
well, I understand that.
Yeah, and secondly, sir, there are significant conformity issues that arise from what will transpire. And it's a new issue under the Post-Bill 139. Because typically what would often happen, as you referenced OPA 320 earlier, those with development applications in the pipeline, whether early or whether late, maybe even on the 1-yard line, would appeal that document and say, let's finish my process out of fairness. And we often hear the clergy principle referenced. The difference here is there'll be no right of appeal. And so there can be an application that has been in the process and even supported now by city staff. Once the minister's decision issues, under Section 24 of the Planning Act, the rules change and conformity is now assessed under those plans. That's a significant issue, and I don't think that's an intended effect of a secondary plan process for Young Eglinton, and it's another reason why I don't think it's the right process. So you could be in the pipeline for 2 years working on an application, and at the 1 yard line, the conformity test would change and you'd have no right to appeal and finish under the rules that were in place when you started. And I think that's a significant concern in terms of how this would work. I also have to say under the Post Bill 139, we're not going to have the OPA 320 because there are timelines in the regulations. For example, 10 months for for LPAT, it's too many acronyms, for LPAT to schedule a hearing, hold a hearing, which is only submissions from council, and then issue a decision. So we're not going to have the spiraling OPA, I call them conventions of municipal lawyers, when we turn up at pre-hearing conferences. That's not going to happen under the new regime. There will be a timeline. It will be maybe longer than the city likes, but it will happen and finish. And the third thing, sir, is there's also mechanisms for the city to ensure that those aspects of the secondary plan not appealed do come into force and effect, which the city can take advantage of in a positive way. And then the 2-year moratorium would start to run, which would then also give the city some protection. So I actually think the Section 17 process is a better process, taking into account all of those factors, and I also think it's the right process.
So one final question. You expressed concern that amendments might be moved here that you have no opportunity to respond to.
Yes, sir.
But if amendments are moved at committee, and not at council, you do have an opportunity to write to council. Is that satisfactory, or would you actually like to have an opportunity to speak to committee?
I would want a second statutory public meeting, sir. If there are amendments that come forward that change the substance of the proposed plan, I think there should be a second statutory public meeting. I take your point, sir. There is the opportunity to write a letter into council, but there wouldn't be the opportunity to address those amendments at a statutory public meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Pepino, you are next up. Sure, now you can get through in 30 seconds.
I certainly intend to be through in 5 minutes and cover 2 sites, if I may. The first is, and allow me just to say that I share Mr. Bronskill's independent legal opinion as someone who acts not only for the development industry, but also individual landowners, ratepayer groups, and from time to time, even this municipality. The first item that I'd like to address is addressed in 30.4.22 submission on your record. It is the southeast corner of Bayview and Eglinton, and I act on behalf of Condor, the owner of one of the pieces of property there and of effectively the air rights from the Metrolink station that is under construction at the moment. It is clear in my review of OPA 405 that council and the planners intend to protect the neighborhoods. That's why you have corridors, zones, and quite compressed intensification areas provided. In this case, however, it's my submission that the application of OPA 405 does not accomplish that goal because it limits the redevelopment opportunity for the southeast quadrant in the one area that is uniquely tied directly, potentially, to the then below grade or subway portion of the LRT to 7 or 8 stories. And if in fact it is the intention to protect the neighborhoods beyond, you're going to have to address density in the appropriate areas, that is, close to the quadrants. My sense is that in this circumstance, the knowledge about the proposed application, which will be filed shortly, there's been pre-consultation, and the knowledge about the Metrolinx agreement to intensify this location was not available to staff, certainly when they started back in 2014, 2015, 2016. Second point I wish to make that's set out in the correspondence is that, and this is a broad submission, that when just in April of this year, your staff put in the major transportation station areas and put in the yellow rings with the 500-meter. In my respectful submission, certainly as it comes to Bayview, they used the wrong minimum density target. Where the crosstown is below grade and where it has short track turnaround capacity at either end, it is, in my submission, a subway, and therefore the minimum density target should be 200, not 160. Secondly, it does not use the standard of the area that is now directed by the province, under the growth plan to optimize the infrastructure investment by looking to not simply 500 meters, but also a 10-minute walking distance. And in that regard, that has not been addressed. And finally, with respect to the actual calculations, there has been no disclosure whatsoever of any calculations that have been done that establish support for the proposition of the staff statement in the OPA that the minimum density targets satisfy the PPS and the growth plan. Let me turn to the second site that I'm addressing, and this is 808 Mount Pleasant. There is detailed correspondence in front of you. I'm sorry, I don't have the number that it is on your agenda. This is on the west side of Mount Pleasant, directly adjacent to the Mount Pleasant station on the north side. There was an application filed on November 14th of 2017 that has been deemed complete, therefore legally is effective as of November 14th. That date is important because, as you will recall, in December, Council backdated approval and said no application that came after November 15th should be processed other than under OPA, what is now OPA 405. Your staff has made a factual legal error by stating and treating that application as if it is one of the latter, as opposed to one that in fact has predated the effective date of processing. Secondly, I simply wish to point out that there was a detailed submission made in writing with respect to this site in April of this year. Your record has absolutely nothing that gives you any information about the review of the issues that were raised or an appropriate response to those. So in my respectful submission, again, for you to make a decision on that site and indeed on any of the sites that are before you today, you do not have the appropriate information to meet the standards of the new regime. Thank you.
Thank you. So, committee members, you have a decision to make. Councillor, I know that. You have a decision to make. Do you wish to extend now for questions, or do you want to break and come back at 1:30? You're okay to extend for questions of the deputant, and then we'll break for lunch? I know a whole bunch of us do. Besides Councillor Matlow, are there other questions? Your questions? Okay. So, motion to extend to permit questions of the deputant. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Matlow.
Thank you.
Ms. Pepino, you earlier stated that you're submitting that this LRT on Eglinton below grade is in fact a subway.
Yes.
Aside from it being below grade, may I ask you to clarify that comment? How do you submit that an LRT is a subway, given that they are two different vehicles?
Well, there might be two different vehicles, but when one looks at the definition, and particularly the fact that for the below grade or subway section of the LRT, there's short-term capacity, which is intended to allow more back and forth feeding than the surface routes, it meets the intention and the operational characteristics of a subway. It is that which I am advised would qualify it for the larger or higher.
But you're not actually submitting that an LRT, a light rapid transit vehicle, is a subway, are you?
It depends on the operational characteristics of the individual segments. In this particular circumstance, the design has A, put it below grade, and B, allowed short-term or higher intensity and frequency usage.
It's an underground portion of an LRT line. It's not a subway.
That is your definition. I'm advised differently.
Thank you. Ms. Pepino, I have one overarching question.
Yes, yes, sir.
Your arguments are not enough density in certain areas.
Yes.
In the Midtown.
Not enough to protect the neighborhood, certainly, or to meet the PPS growth plan.
The statistics I have from staff was in 2006, the population in the area was 51,400. In 2011, 57,000. 2016, 62,000. As well, there's another 19, the units for another 19,000 people approved, and under review is another 9,400. So we're talking about 91,000 persons of population in this area from 51,000 in 2006, much of it not built. And this plan suggests going to 120,000 persons of population. It's your submission that the transportation capacity and the infrastructure in the area comprehensively, because this is a comprehensive plan, can hold more than that?
I'm submitting something different, and that is that and as Mr. Bronskill said, I think perhaps Bill 139 will turn out to be like that old curse, may you get what you ask for. The new rules are that the province gets to set the standards for density around major transit stations by virtue of the growth plan and big moves and the more recently adopted Metrolinx initiatives. And they have set minimum targets, and they have suggested, if I may please, minimum distances within which those persons should be optimized.
I know that, but those distances...
And, if I just may finish my thought...
That's the distance within a growth area and a subway station. We all know that.
It's not just a subway station, sir.
Or
it's any
LRT.
major transit area.
It doesn't matter. I'm asking about the comprehensiveness of the plan, where it's talking to more than double the population that lived in the area in 2006.
Right.
And whether, from your review of the larger plan, not those particular areas, that plan can manage more than the proposed population of 120,000 people, because I'm not looking at just your space. I'm looking at the slightly larger area, which is Midtown.
Yes.
And is it your submission that the infrastructure in place, transportation, water, sewage, parks, everything else, can manage in that growth area more than 120,000 people?
My submission rather is that the rules have now changed, and with respect to the issue of capacity and population, that is driven now by the provincial numbers that have been given. And the staff reports and all the material that's been provided has not addressed those. So although I recognize that folks are believing that 405 is in itself comprehensive, it doesn't meet the new way of planning that is coming down as a direction from the province. It couldn't. It wasn't initiated as such. And to answer your question directly, there has been no calculation that takes into account the directives of the province with respect to the population expectations to support infrastructure of a transit nature within this area or indeed any other.
I didn't ask.
The water and the pipes are up to you.
And the transportation impact, I asked if it was your review, not what the province has said and not what their growth plan says. You study these things and you're well knowledgeable. And it was a simple, larger picture question.
Yeah.
And if you don't wish to answer that,
It's not that I don't wish to answer. It is that your staff have not produced the data to allow that to be known or answered.
Whether 120,000 is the right population.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Or whether it meets the provincial directives of the growth plan.
I didn't ask you that.
I understand, but I wanted to give you a complete answer, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, we are now recessed until 1:30. Thank you very much.